The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning, mid-October, with the sun not shining and a look of hard, wet rain in the clearness of the foothills. I was wearing my powder blue suit, with dark blue shirt, tie and display handkerchief, black brogues and black wool socks with blue clocks on them. I was neat, clean, shaved and sober, and I didn't care who knew it. I was everything the well-dressed private detective ought to be. I was calling on $4 million. The main hallway of the Sternwood place was 2 stories high. The entrance doors would have let in a troop of Indian elephants. I was standing in the hall where the butler had left me, waiting to see General Guy Sternwood. There were French doors at the back of the hall, beyond them a wide sweep of emerald grass to a white garage, in front of which a slim, dark young chauffeur in shiny black leggings was dusting a maroon Packard convertible. Beyond the garage was a large greenhouse with a domed roof. Then beyond everything, the solid, uneven, uncomfortable line of the foothills. A door opened far back under the stairs. It wasn't the butler coming back. It was a girl. She was 20 or so, small and delicately put together, but she looked durable. Her eyes were slate gray, and had almost no expression when they looked at me. She came over near me and smiled. She had little sharp predatory teeth as white and shiny as porcelain. They glistened between her thin, too taut lips. Her face lacked color and didn't look too healthy. "Tall, aren't you?" she said. I didn't mean to be. Her eyes rounded. She was puzzled. She was thinking. I could see, even on that short acquaintance, that thinking was always going to be a bother to her. "What's your name?" "Riley," I said. "Doghouse Riley." "That's a funny name." She bit her lip and turned her head a little and looked at me along her eyes. Then she lowered her lashes until they almost cuddled her cheeks and slowly raised them again, like a theater curtain. I was to get to know that trick. That was supposed to make me roll over on my back with all 4 paws in the air. "Are you a prize fighter?" she asked, when I didn't. "Not exactly. I'm a sleuth." She bit her thumb and sucked it slowly, turning it around in her mouth like a baby with a comforter. "You're awfully tall," she said. Then she giggled with secret merriment. Her hands dropped limp at her sides. She tilted herself towards me on her toes and fell straight back into my arms. I had to catch her or let her crack her head on the floor. I caught her under her arms and had to hold her close to hold her up. She giggled at me. "You're cute. I'm cute, too." I didn't say anything. So the butler chose that convenient moment to come back through the French doors and see me holding her. It didn't seem to bother him. He was a tall, thin, silver man, 60 or close to. He had blue eyes as remote as eyes could be. He walked slowly across the floor towards us, and the girl jerked away from me. She flashed across the hall to the foot of the stairs and went up them like a deer. The butler said tonelessly, "The General will see you now, Mr. Marlowe." I pushed my lower jaw up off my chest and nodded at him. "Who was that?" "Miss Carmen Sternwood, sir, the General's younger daughter." We went out at the French doors and along a smooth, red-flagged path that skirted the far side of the lawn from the garage. The boyish-looking chauffeur had a big black and chromium sedan out now and was dusting that. The path took us to the greenhouse, and the butler opened a door for me, and we went inside. It was about as warm as a slow oven. The air was thick, wet, steamy, and lauded with the cloying smell of tropical orchids in bloom. The light had an unreal greenish color, like light filtered through an aquarium tank. After a while, we came to a clearing in the middle of the jungle, under the domed roof. Here, in a wheelchair, an old and obviously dying man watched us come, with coal black eyes, from which all fire had died long ago. His long, narrow body was wrapped in a traveling rug and a faded red bathrobe. His thin, claw-like hands were folded loosely on the rug, purple-nailed. The butler stood in front of him and said, "This is Mr. Marlowe, General." The old man didn't speak or move or even nod. He just looked at me, lifelessly. The butler pushed a damp wicker chair against the backs of my legs, and I sat down. He took my hat with a deft scoop. Then the old man dragged his voice up from the bottom of a well and said,
Brandy for Mr. Marlowe, Norris."
The butler went away among the abominable plants. The general spoke again, slowly, using his strength as carefully as an out-of-work showgirl uses her last good pair of stockings.
"You may take your coat off, sir. It's too hot in here for a man with blood in his veins."
I stood up and peeled off my coat. The general continued speaking slowly.
"You are looking at a very dull survival of a rather gaudy life. The cripple paralyzed in both legs and with only half of his lower belly. There's very little that I can eat, and my sleep is so close to waking that it is hardly worth the name."
The general half closed his eyes. The soft, wet heat was like a pall around us. The butler came pushing back through the jungle with a tea wagon, mixed me a brandy and soda, and went away softly among the orchids.
"Tell me about yourself, Mr. Marlowe."
I sipped my drink and then said, "There's very little to tell. I'm 33 years old, went to college once, and can still speak English if there's any demand for it. There isn't much in my trade. I worked for Mr. Wilde, the district attorney, as an investigator once. His chief investigator, a man named Bernie Oles, called me and told me you wanted to see me. I'm unmarried because I don't like policemen's wives." The old man smiled.
"What do you know about my family?"
"I'm told you were a widower and have 2 young daughters, both pretty and both wild. One of them has been married 3 times, the last time to an ex-bootlegger who went by the name of Rusty Regan. That's all I heard, General."
"Did any of it strike you as peculiar?"
"The Rusty Regan part, maybe, but I always got along with bootleggers myself." He smiled his faint economical smile.
"Seems I do, too. I'm very fond of Rusty. Big, curly-headed Irishman from Clonmel, with sad eyes and a wide smile. It was a ridiculous marriage, of course. I'm telling you the family secrets, Mr. Marlowe."
"They're still secrets," I said. "What happened to him?" The old man looked at me woodenly.
"He went away a month ago, abruptly, without a word to anyone, without saying goodbye to me. That hurt a little. But I'll hear from him one of these days. Meantime, I am being blackmailed again."
I said, "Again?" He brought his hands from under the rug with a brown envelope in them.
"I should have been very sorry for anybody who tried to blackmail me while Rusty was around. A few months before he came, that is to say, about 9 or 10 months ago, I paid a man named Joe Brody $5,000 to let my younger daughter Carmen alone."
I took the envelope off his knees. It was addressed to General Guy Sternwood, 3765 Alta Brea Crescent, West Hollywood, California. I opened it up and took out a card and 3 slips of stiff paper. The card was printed in gold. Mr. Arthur Gwynne Geiger. No address, very small in the lower left-hand corner, rare books and deluxe editions. I turned the card over. On the back was written, "Dear Sir, in spite of the legal uncollectability of the enclosed, which frankly represent gambling debts, I assume you might wish them honored. Respectfully, A.G. Geiger." I read the slips, which were promissory notes filled out in ink on several dates early in the month before. On demand, I promised to pay Arthur Gwynne Geiger or order the sum of $1,000 without interest. Value received. Carmen Sternwood. This was written in a sprawling moronic handwriting with a lot of fat curlicues and circles for dots. I mixed myself another drink and sipped it and put the exhibit aside.
"Your conclusions?"
the general asked. "I haven't any yet. Who is this Arthur Gwynne Geiger?"
"I haven't the faintest idea."
"What does Carmen say?"
"I haven't asked her. I don't intend to. If I did, she would suck her thumb and look coy."
I said, "She did that to me just now. Then she tried to sit in my lap while I was standing up." Nothing changed in his expression. His clasped hands rested peacefully on the edge of the rug, and the heat, which made me feel like a boiled dinner, didn't seem to make him even warm. "Do the 2 girls run around together?" I asked.
"I think not. They go their separate and slightly divergent roads to perdition."
He leaned his head back and closed his eyes, then opened them again suddenly.
"I need not add that a man who indulges in parenthood for the first time at the age of 54 deserves all he gets."
I sipped my drink and nodded.
Your conclusions?
He asked suddenly. I'd pay him.
I have pride, sir,
he said coldly. Somebody's counting on that. Who was this Joe Brody you paid the $5,000 to?
Some kind of gambler. I hardly recall. Norris, the butler, would know.
Your daughters have money in their own right, General?
Vivian has, but not a great deal. Carmen is still a minor under her mother's will. I give them both generous allowances.
I said, I can take this Geiger off your back, General, if that's what you want. It may cost you a little money besides what you pay me. And of course it won't get you anything. Sugaring them never does. You're already listed on their book of nice names.
I see.
He shrugged his shoulders weakly.
What are your charges, Mr. Marlowe?
I get $25 a day and expenses, when I'm lucky.
I see. Seems reasonable enough, removing morbid growths from people's backs. The matter is now in your hands.
He closed his eyes, settled back among his cushions, and didn't pay any more attention to me. I stood up and lifted my coat off the back of the damp wicker chair and went outside. I stood in the brisk October air, getting myself some oxygen. The chauffeur over by the garage had gone away. The butler came along the path with smooth, light steps and said gravely, "Mrs. Regan would like to see you before you leave, sir." A few moments later, I was sitting on the edge of a deep, soft chair, looking at Mrs. Regan. She was worth a stare. She was trouble, stretched out on a chaise longue. I stared at her legs in the sheerest silk stockings. They seemed to be arranged to stare at. She had hot black eyes, a good mouth, and a good chin. There was a sulky droop to her lips, and the lower lip was full. She had a drink. She took a swallow from it and gave me a cool, level stare over the rim of her glass. "So you're a private detective," she said. "I didn't know they really existed except in books. Or else they were greasy little men snooping around hotels. Dad wants you to find Rusty, doesn't he?" I stared at her politely through a pause. "Yes and no," I said. "Well, that's hardly an answer. Do you think you can find him?" "I didn't say I was going to try. Why not try the Missing Persons Bureau?" "Oh, Dad wouldn't hear of the police being brought into it." She looked at me smoothly across her glass again. I said nothing. "Well, how will you go about it, then?" she continued. I grinned at her with my head on one side. She flushed. Her hot black eyes looked mad. "I don't see what there is to be cagey about," she snapped. "And I don't like your manners." "I'm not crazy about yours," I said. "I didn't ask to see you. You sent for me. I don't mind your ritzing me or drinking your lunch out of a Scotch bottle. I don't mind your showing me your legs. They're very swell legs, and it's a pleasure to make their acquaintance. I don't mind if you don't like my manners. They're pretty bad. I grieve over them during the long winter evenings, but don't waste your time trying to cross-examine me." She slammed her glass down so hard that it slopped over on an ivory cushion. She swung her legs to the floor and stood up with her eyes sparkling fire and her nostrils wide. Her mouth was open and her bright teeth glared at me. "People don't talk like that to me," she said angrily. I sat there and grinned at her. "That wasn't what he wanted with you at all," she said in a strained voice that still had shreds of anger clinging to it. "About Rusty, was it?" "I'd better ask him." She flared up again. "Get out, damn you! Get out!" I stood up. "Sit down!" she snapped. I sat down. Eventually she said, "You could find Rusty, if Dad wanted you to." I nodded and asked, "When did he go?" "One afternoon a month back. He just drove away in his car without saying a word. They found the car in a private garage somewhere." "They?" She smiled at me winningly. "He didn't tell you then?" Her voice was almost gleeful, as if she had outsmarted me. Maybe she had. "He told me about Mr. Regan, yes. That's not what he wanted to see me about. Is that what you've been trying to get me to say?" "I'm sure I don't care what you say." I stood up again. "Then I'll be running along." I went out, down the tile staircase to the hall, and the butler drifted out of somewhere with my hat in his hand. He closed the door against my back. I stood on the step, looking down the estate. Far off, I could just barely see some of the old wooden derricks of the oil field from which the Sternwoods had made their money. I walked out of the gates to where I'd left my car. Thunder was crackling in the foothills now, and the sky above them was purple-black. It was going to rain hard. I put the top up on my convertible before I started downtown. She had lovely legs. I would say that for her. They were a couple of pretty smooth citizens, she and her father. He was probably just trying me out. The job he had given me was a lawyer's job. Even if Mr. Arthur Gwynne Geiger, Rare Books and Deluxe Editions, turned out to be a blackmailer, it was still a lawyer's job. Unless there was a lot more to it than met the eye. At a casual glance, I thought I might have a lot of fun finding out. I drove down to the Hollywood Public Library and did a little superficial research in a stuffy volume called Famous First Editions. A half an hour later, equipped with a few newfound facts, I dropped into Geiger's store on the north side of the boulevard near Las Palmas. I let the door close softly behind me and walked on a thick blue rug that paved the floor from wall to wall. There were blue leather easy chairs with smoke stands beside them. A few sets of tooled leather bindings were set out on narrow polished tables between bookends. There were more tooled bindings in glass cases on the walls. At the back, there was a grained wood partition with a door in the middle of it, shut. In the corner, made by the partition in one wall, a woman sat behind a desk. She got up slowly and swayed towards me in a tight black dress. She had long thighs, and she walked with a certain something I hadn't often seen in bookstores. She was an ash blonde with greenish eyes, and she approached me with enough sex appeal to stampede a businessman's lunch. "Was it something?" she inquired. I had my horn-rimmed sunglasses on. I put my voice high and let a bird twitter in it. "Would you happen to have a Ben-Hur 1860? She didn't say, but she wanted to. She smiled bleakly. "A first edition?" "Third," I said. "The one with the erratum on page 116? "I'm afraid not, at the moment." "Well, how about a Chevalier Audubon, 1840? Full set, of course." Not at the moment," she said harshly. Her smile was now hanging by its teeth and eyebrows and wondering what it would hit when it dropped. "You do sell books," I said in my polite falsetto. She looked me over. No smile now. Eyes medium to hard, pose very straight and stiff. She waved silver fingernails at the glassed-in shelves. "Well, what do they look like? Grapefruit?" She tried to jack the smile back up in her face. She was as sore as an alderman with mumps. "Perhaps Mr. Geiger, but he's not in at the moment." Her eyes studied me carefully. She knew as much about rare books as I knew about handling a flea circus. Famous First Editions had told me that much. "He might be in later?" "I'm afraid not until late." "Oh, too bad," I said. Too bad. Well, I can wait. I have rather a blank afternoon. Nothing to think about but my trigonometry lesson." "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course." I sat down and lit a cigarette. She still stood, holding her lower lip with her teeth, her eyes vaguely troubled. Silence for about 5 minutes. Then the door opened, and a tall, hungry-looking man with a cane came in, shut the door behind him, and placed a wrapped parcel in front of her. The blonde pressed a button on the desk. The tall man went to the door in the panel partition and opened it barely enough to slip through. I finished my cigarette and lit another. The minutes dragged by. Horns tooted and grunted on the boulevard. The partition door opened, and the tall man slid out. He had another wrapped parcel, the shape of a large book. He went over to the desk and paid money. He left as he had come, walking on the balls of his feet, breathing with his mouth open, giving me a sharp side glance as he passed. I got to my feet, tipped my hat to the blonde, and went out after him. He walked west and was easy to follow. I pulled up beside him and let him see me. He gave me a casual, then a suddenly sharpened side glance and quickly turned away. He almost raised dust going up the block, walking with long, gawky strides and jabbing his cane into the pavement. He turned left. He had at least half a block on me when I reached the place where he had turned. This was a narrow, tree-lined street. The thunder in the foothills was rumbling again. A few tentative raindrops splashed down on the pavement and made spots as large as nickels. The man was gone, but a plain wrapped parcel jutted out from a nearby trash can. I drew out the wrapped book and put it under my arm. Back on the boulevard, I went into a drugstore phone booth and looked up Mr. Arthur Gwynne Geiger's residence. He lived on Laverne Terrace, a hillside street off Laurel Canyon Boulevard. I dropped my nickel and dialed his number just for fun. Nobody answered. The rain had started. I ran for it with the wrapped book under my arm. My car was on a side street pointing at the boulevard almost opposite Geiger's store. I was well sprinkled before I got there. I tumbled into the car and ran both windows up and wiped my parcel off with my handkerchief. Then I opened it up. I knew about what it would be, of course. A heavy book, well-bound, handsomely printed on fine paper, lauded with full-page Audi photographs. The book was not new. Dates were stamped on the front-end paper, in and out dates. A rent book. A lending library of elaborate smut. A racket like that out in the open on the boulevard seemed to mean plenty of protection. I sat there and poisoned myself with cigarette smoke and listened to the rain and thought about it. Rain filled the gutters and splashed knee-high off the pavement. In spite of the rain, or perhaps even because of it, there was business done at Geiger's. Very nice cars stopped in front, and very nice-looking people went in and out with wrapped parcels. They were not all men. Another hour went by. It got dark, and the rain-clouded lights of the stores were soaked up by the black street. At around 5:15, a tall boy in a jerkin came out of Geiger's with an umbrella. Then a fat man with a Charlie Chan mustache came out, and the tall boy held the umbrella over his bare head. They moved towards a cream-colored coupe, and the fat man got in. The boy then dashed back into the store. I hadn't seen this fat guy go into the store, so I took a guess that he was Geiger. This turned out to be a good guess, and I tailed the coupe all the way out to Laverne Terrace. It was a narrow street with a high bank on one side and a scattering of cabin-like houses built down the slope on the other side. Geiger had his lights on, and I hadn't. I speeded up and passed him on a curve and turned at the end of the block. He had already stopped. His car lights were tilted at the garage of a small house with a square box hedge so arranged that it masked the front door completely. I watched him go in. He didn't act as if he expected anybody to be tailing him. I sat in my car. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but something told me to wait. Another army of sluggish minutes dragged by. At a little after 6, a car dragged to a stop in front of Geiger's house. The door opened and a woman got out. A small, slim woman in a hat and raincoat. A bell rang faintly. Light through the rain, a closing door, silence. I reached a flash out of my car pocket and went and looked at the car. It was a Packard convertible. The left window was down. I felt for the license holder and poked light at it. The registration read, Carmen Sternwood, 3765 Aldabrea Crescent, West Hollywood. I went back to my car again and sat. And sat. At 7:20, a single flash of hard white light shot out of Geiger's house like a wave of summer lightning. As the darkness folded back on it and ate it up, a thin, tinkling scream echoed out and lost itself among the rain-drenched trees. I was out of the car and on my way before the echoes died. There was no fear in the scream. It had a sound of half-pleasurable shock, an accent of drunkenness, an overtone of pure idiocy. The Geiger hideaway was perfectly silent again when I reached the front door. At that exact instant, as if somebody had been waiting for the cue, 3 shots boomed in the house. There was a sound that might have been a long, harsh sigh, then a soft, messy thump, and then rapid footsteps in the house, going away to the back. The back entrance was at the top of a flight of wooden steps that rose from the alley-like street below. I knew this because I heard a clatter of feet on the steps going down. And then I heard the sudden roar of a starting car. It faded swiftly into the distance. I thought the sound was echoed by another car, but I wasn't sure. I gave the front door the heavy shoulder. This was foolish. About the only part of a California house you can't put your foot through is the front door. All it did was hurt my shoulder and make me mad. I kicked the French window in. The catch gave. I climbed in and pulled the drapes off my face. Neither of the 2 people in the room paid any attention to the way I came in, although only one of them was dead. It was a wide room, the whole width of the house. It had a low-beamed ceiling and brown plaster walls decked out with strips of Chinese embroidery and Japanese prints. There was a broad, low divan of old rose tapestry. It had a wad of clothes on it, including lilac-colored silk underwear. The room contained an odd assortment of odors, of which the most emphatic at the moment seemed to be the pungent aftermath of cordite and the sickish aroma of ether. On a sort of low dais at one end of the room there was a high-backed teakwood chair, in which Miss Carmen Sternwood was sitting on a fringed orange shawl. Her eyes were wide open. Out of her mouth came a tinny chuckling noise which didn't change her expression or even move her lips. She was wearing a pair of long jade earrings. She wasn't wearing anything else. I stopped looking at her and looked at Geiger. He was on his back on the floor, in front of a camera on a tripod. There was a blackened flash bulb clipped to the side, but someone had taken the plate holder. Geiger was wearing black satin pajamas and a Chinese embroidered coat, the front of which was mostly blood. At a glance, none of the 3 shots I heard had missed. He was very dead. The flashbulb was the sheet lightning I'd seen. The crazy scream was the doped and naked girl's reaction to it. The 3 shots had been somebody else's idea of how the proceedings might be given a new twist. The idea of the lad who had gone down the back steps and slammed into a car and raced away. I could see merit in his point of view. I went over to the divan and poured through the girl's clothes. There was a pale green wool dress of the pull-on type. I took the dress over to the teak chair on the dais. Miss Sternwood smelled of ether also, at a distance of several feet. The tinny chuckling noise was still coming from her, and a little froth oozed down her chin. I slapped her face. She blinked and stopped chuckling. I slapped her again. "Come on," I said brightly. "Let's be nice. Let's get dressed." She peered at me, her slaty eyes as empty as holes in a mask. "Go to hell," she said. I slapped her around a little more. She didn't mind the slaps. I set to work with the dress. She didn't mind that either. She let me hold her arms up, and she spread her fingers out wide, as if that was cute. I got the dress down over her back and her shoes on her. I went and investigated the house. There was a bathroom on the right and a locked door. A kitchen at the back. The kitchen window had been jimmied. The back door was unlocked. I left it unlocked and looked into a bedroom on the left side of the hall. It was neat, fussy, womanish. The bed had a flounced cover. There was perfume on the triple-mirrored dressing table and some keys. A man's clothes were in the closet and a man's slippers under the flounced edge of the bed cover. Mr. Geiger's room. I took the keys back to the living room and went through the desk. There was a locked steel box in the deep drawer. I used one of the keys on it. There was nothing in it but a blue leather book with an index and a lot of writing in code, in the same slanting printing that had written to General Sternwood. I put the notebook in my pocket, wiped the steel box where I had touched it, locked the desk up, pocketed the keys, and tried to rouse Miss Sternwood. It couldn't be done. I crammed her hat on her head and swathed her in her coat and carried her out to a car. I went back and put all the lights out and shut the front door, dug her keys out of her bag, and started the Packard. We went off down the hill without lights. At the Sternwood mansion, I got out and rang the bell. Steps came slowly, as if from a long, dreary distance. The door opened, and the straight, silvery butler looked out at me. He said, "Good evening, sir," politely, and looked past me at the Packard. "Is Mrs. Regan in?" "No, sir." "The General's asleep, I hope." "Yes, the evening is his best time for sleeping." "How about a maid?" "Matilda? She's here, sir." "No, better get her down here. The job needs the woman's touch. Take a look in the car, and you'll see why." He took a look in the car and came back. "I see," he said. "Thank you, sir. May I call you a cab?" "Positively not," I said. "As a matter of fact, I'm not here. You're just seeing things." He nodded, and I turned and walked down the driveway and out of the gates. I made it back to Geiger's house in something over half an hour of nimble walking. There was nobody there, no car on the street except my own in front of the next house. It looked as dismal as a lost dog. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the still warm darkness and stood there, dripping quietly on the floor and listening to the rain. I groped to a lamp and lit it. The first thing I noticed was that a couple of strips of embroidered silk were gone from the wall. The spaces of brown plaster stood out naked and obvious. I went a little farther and put another lamp on. Geiger's body was gone. That froze me. I went through the house again. Geiger wasn't in his flounced bed or in the kitchen or the bathroom. That left the locked door on the right of the hall. One of Geiger's keys fitted the lock. The room inside was interesting, but Geiger wasn't in it. It was a hard, bare, masculine bedroom with a polished wood floor. The room felt cold. I locked it up again, wiped the knob off with my handkerchief, and went back to the camera. I knelt down and squinted along the nap of the rug to the front door. I thought I could see two parallel grooves pointing that way, as though heels had dragged. It wasn't the law. They would have been there still, just about getting warmed up, with their pieces of string and chalk and their cameras and dusting powders and their nickel cigars. I couldn't guess the answer, but it was all right with me. I rode off home to a shower, dry clothes, and a late dinner. After that, I sat around in the apartment and drank too much hot toddy trying to crack the code in Geiger's blue-indexed notebook. All I could be sure of was that it was a list of names and addresses, probably of the customers. There were over 400 of them. That made it a nice racket, not to mention any blackmail angles, and there were probably plenty of those. Any name on the list might be a prospect as the killer. I didn't envy the police their job when it was handed to them. The next morning was bright, clear, and sunny. I woke up and went through the morning papers. I didn't find any reference to Mr. Arthur Gwynne Geiger in either of them. The phone rang. It was Bernie Olds, the DA's chief investigator, who had given me the lead to General Sternwood. His voice was a shade too casual, a cagey cop voice. "Seen General Sternwood yet?" "Uh-huh." "Done anything for him?" he asked. "Too much rain," I answered, if that was an answer. "They seem to be a family things happened to. A big Buick belonging to one of them is washing about in the surf off Lido Fish Pier." I held the telephone tight enough to crack it. I also held my breath. "Yeah," Olds said cheerfully. "A nice new Buick sedan, all messed up with sand and seawater. Oh, I almost forgot. There's a guy inside it." I let my breath out slowly. "Regan?" I asked. "I don't know, pal. I'm dropping down to look-see. You want to go along?" Shaved, dressed, and lightly breakfasted, I was at the Hall of Justice in less than an hour. Bernie was in his office there, waiting for me, and we drove the 30 miles to Lido Pier in his car, using the siren once in a while to beat a signal. At the pier, a knot of people leaned out at the far end, and a motorcycle officer stood on guard, keeping any more from going out. Olds showed the motorcycle officer his badge, and we went out on the pier. "Well, there she is," Olds said, pointing at a low black barge crouched against the pilings at the end of the pier. On its deck, with hoist chains still around it, was a large black and chromium car. Men stood around the car. We went down slippery steps to the deck. Olds said hello to a deputy in green khaki and a man in plain clothes. We looked the car over. The front bumper was bent. One headlight smashed, and the radiator shell had a big dent in it. None of the tires seemed to be damaged. The driver was still draped around the steering post with his head at an unnatural angle to his shoulders. He was a slim, dark-haired young man. His face was bluish-white, and his eyes were a faint, dull gleam under the lowered lids, and his open mouth had sand in it. On the left side of his forehead there was a dull bruise that stood out against the whiteness of the skin. "What's the story?" Olds asked. The uniformed man pointed up at the rubbernecks on the end of the pier. One of them was fingering a place where the white 2x4s had been broken through in a wide space. The splintered wood showed yellow and clean, like fresh-cut pine. "It went through there. Must have hit pretty hard. The rain stopped early down here, around 9 p.m. The broken wood's dry inside. That puts it after the rain stopped. She fell in plenty of water not to be banged up worse, and not more than half tide or she'd have drifted farther. That makes it around 10 last night. Maybe 9:30, not earlier. Could have been drunk." "Drunk hell," the plainclothes man said. "The hand throttle's set halfway down, and the guy's been sapped on the side of the head. Ask me, and I'll call it murder." A small man with glasses and a tired face and a black bag came down the steps from the pier. Olds said, "There's your customer, Doc. Dived off the pier last night, around 9 to 10. That's all we know." The small man looked in at the dead kid morosely. He fingered the head, peered at the bruise on the temple, moved the head around with both hands, and felt the man's ribs. "A broken neck's the apparent cause of death," he said, "which means there won't be much water in him. He's due to start getting stiff pretty quick now he's out in the air. You better get him out of the car before he does." Olds nodded. "How long dead, Doc?" The little man grinned sourly. "If he ate dinner last night, I'll tell you, if I know what time he ate it." He looked at the bruise again. "That blow came from something covered, and it had already bled subcutaneously while he was alive." "Blackjack?" Olds suggested. "Very likely." As we drove back, Olds cocked his chin at me and said, "Know him?" "Sure. The Sternwood chauffeur. I saw him dusting that very car out there yesterday." "I don't want to crowd you, Marlowe. Just tell me, did the job have anything to do with him?" "No, I don't even know his name." Olds looked relieved. "The name's Owen Taylor. About a year or so back, we had him in the cooler on a Mann Act rap. It seems he run Sternwood's hotshot daughter, the young one, off to Yuma. The sister ran after them and brought them back and had Owen heaved into the icebox. Then next day she comes down to the DA and gets him to beg the kid off with the U.S. cuter. She says the kid meant to marry her sister, only the sister can't see it. So we let the kid go, and they keep him on just the same. What do you think of that?" "They seem to be a screwy family," I said. "Do they know about last night?" "No, I gotta tell them now." "Well, leave the old man out of it if you can," I said. "He has enough troubles, and he's sick." "You mean Regan?" I scowled. "I don't know anything about Regan, I told you. I'm not looking for Regan. Regan hasn't bothered anybody that I know of." When Olds dropped me off in town, I decided to take another look at Geiger's store. The same ash blonde got up and came towards me with the same tentative smile on her face. It wasn't a smile at all. It was a grimace. She just thought it was a smile. "Back again," I said airily, and waved a cigarette. "Mr. Geiger in today?" "No, I'm afraid not." I took my dark glasses off and tapped them delicately on the side of my left wrist. If you can weigh 190 pounds and look like a fairy, I was doing my best. "Oh, that was just a stall about those first editions," I whispered. "I have to be careful. I've got something he'll want." "Oh, a salesman," she said. "Well, you might come in tomorrow." Is he sick? I could go up to the house," I said impatiently. You... Her throat jammed. Her face fell, then the smile came back with a couple of corners badly bent. "No," she said. "No, that wouldn't be any use. Can't you come in tomorrow?" I had my mouth open to say something when the partition door opened. The tall, dark, handsome boy in the jerkin looked out, pale-faced and tight-lipped, saw me, shut the door quickly again, but not before I had seen on the floor behind him a lot of wooden boxes lined with newspapers and packed loosely with books. Geiger's stock was being moved out. When the door shut, I put my dark glasses on again and touched my hat to the girl and said, "Tomorrow, then." I went round to the alley which ran behind the stores. A small black truck was backed up to Geiger's place. A man in overalls was just heaving a box up on the tailboard. I went back to the boulevard and found a taxi standing at a fire plug. A fresh-faced kid was reading a horror magazine behind the wheel. I leaned in and showed him $1. "Tail job?" He looked me over. "Cop?" "Private." He grinned. "My meat, Jack." We tailed the truck across town to the basement garage of an apartment block on Randall Place. I got out and told the driver to wait. In the lobby, I looked over the names on the mailboxes. A man named Joseph Brody had apartment 405. A man named Joe Brody had received $5,000 from General Sternwood to stop playing with Carmen. I felt like giving odds it was the same Joe Brody. I took the stairs to the basement. The automatic elevator was propped open, and the same man in overalls was grunting hard as he stacked heavy boxes in it. I stood beside him and lit a cigarette and watched him. He didn't like my watching him. After a while, I said, "Watch the weight, bud. She's only tested for half a ton. Where's the stuff going?" "Brody, 405, he said. "Are you the manager?" "Yeah. Looks like a nice lot of loot." He glared at me with pale, white-rimmed eyes. "Books," he snarled. 100 pounds a box easy, and me with a 75-pound back. "Well, watch the weight," I said. I went back up the steps to the lobby and out to the street, and the cab took me downtown again to my office building. I gave the fresh-faced kid too much money, and he gave me a dog-eared card, which for once I didn't drop into the Majolica jar of sand beside the elevator bank. I had a room and a half on the 7th floor at the back. The half room was an office split in two to make reception rooms. Mine had my name on it and nothing else, and that only on the reception room. I always left this unlocked in case I had a client, and the client cared to sit down and wait. I had a client. She wore hand-carved walking shoes. Her stockings were just as sheer as the day before, but she wasn't showing as much of her legs. "Well, you do get up," she said, wrinkling her nose. "I was beginning to think you worked in bed like Marcel Proust." "Who's he?" I put a cigarette in my mouth and stared at her. She looked a little pale and strained, but she looked like a girl who could function under a strain. "A French writer, a connoisseur in degenerates. You wouldn't know him." "Tut, tut," I said. "Come into my boudoir." There were 3 near-walnut chairs, the usual desk with the usual blotter, pen set, ashtray, and telephone, and the usual squeaky swivel chair behind it. "You don't put on much of a front," she said, sitting down at the customer's side of the desk. "You can't make much money at this trade if you're honest. If you have a front, you're making money." I hung my hat on the telephone and sat down. She said, "I've been trying to get you on the phone all morning." "About Owen?" I asked. Her face tightened sharply. I explained. "A DA's man took me down to Lido. He thought I might know something about it." She shrugged. "I didn't come to see you about Owen." "Do you feel that you can tell me what my father wanted to see you about?" "Not without his permission." She took a thick white envelope from her bag and tossed it at me. "You'd better look at this," she said. I picked it up. The address was typewritten to Mrs. Vivian Regan. I opened the envelope and drew out the shiny photo that was inside. It was Carmen, sitting in her birthday suit at Geiger's. I put it back in the envelope. "How much do they want?" I asked. $5,000, for the negative and the rest of the prints. A woman telephoned me about half an hour after this thing was delivered. Said there was a police jam connected with it, and I'd better lay it on the line fast, or I'd be talking to my little sister through a wire screen. "What kind of jam?" I asked. "I don't know." "Where's Carmen now?" "She's at home. She was sick last night. The servants say she didn't go out. I was down at Las Olindas playing roulette at Eddie Mars's Cypress Club." I changed tack. "What was Owen doing last night with your car?" "Nobody knows. He took it without permission. We always let him take a car on his night off, but last night wasn't his night off." She made a wry mouth. "Do you think he knew about the photo?" I said, "I don't rule him out. Can you get $5,000 in cash right away?" "Or not unless I tell Dad. Or borrow it. I could probably borrow it from Eddie Mars." She leaned back and hung an arm over the back of the chair. "How about telling the police?" "It's a good idea, but you won't do it. You have to protect your father and your sister. You don't know what the police might turn up. It might be something they couldn't sit on." "I'll get the $5,000, she said. "I've been a good customer of Eddie Mars. There's another reason why he should be nice to me, which you may not know." She gave me one of those smiles the lips have forgotten before they reach the eyes. "Eddie's blonde wife is the lady Rusty ran away with." I didn't say anything. She stared tightly at me and added, "That doesn't interest you?" "It ought to make it easier to find him, if I was looking for him. You've got all you wanted out of me. A pretty good idea I'm not looking for your husband." She reached for the envelope and stood up. "I'll keep in touch with you," I said. We walked over to the door. Tapping the white envelope against her knuckles, she said, "You still feel you can't tell me what Dad—" I said, "Uh-huh." She took the photo out and stood looking at it, just inside the door. "She has a beautiful little body, hasn't she?" I said, "Uh-huh." She leaned a little towards me. "You ought to see mine," she said gravely. "Well, can it be arranged?" She laughed suddenly and sharply and went halfway through the door, then turned her head to say coolly, "You're as cold-blooded a beast as I've ever met, Marlowe. Or can I call you Phil?" "Sure." "You can call me Vivian." "Oh, thanks, Mrs. Regan." "Oh, go to hell, Marlowe." She went on out and didn't look back. I took my hat off the phone and called the DA's office and asked Bernie Olds about the Owen Taylor case. "Suicide?" I asked. Olds paused before answering. "No one can tell. He didn't leave any notes. That sap mark on the boy's head bothers me. Sure you can't help me on this?" I liked his putting it that way. It let me say no without actually lying. We said goodbye. I left the office and bought all 3 afternoon papers. There was nothing in any of the papers about Geiger. I took another look at his blue notebook, but the code was just as stubborn as it had been the night before. I decided to drive over to Laverne Terrace. There was no activity in front of Geiger's house or anywhere along the block. I drove past slowly, gnawing at an idea. I hadn't looked in the garage the night before. Once Geiger's body slipped away, I hadn't really wanted to find it. I didn't get a chance to look this time. The doors were shut and padlocked, and something moved behind the hedge as I drew level. A woman stepped out and stood looking wild-eyed at my car, as if she hadn't heard it come up the hill. It was Carmen Sternwood, of course. I went on up the street and parked and walked back. "Remember me?" I said. "Doghouse Riley, remember?" She nodded, and a quick, jerky smile played across her face. "Let's go in," I said. "I've got a key." In the daytime, the place had a stealthy nastiness like a fag party. We went inside. Carmen stood in front of me like a bad girl in the principal's office. "How much do you remember of last night?" I asked her. She answered, with a foxy glitter rising at the back of her eyes, "Remember what? I was sick last night. I was home." Her voice was a cautious, throaty sound that just reached my ears. "Like hell you were." Her eyes flickered up and down very swiftly. "Before you went home," I said, "before I took you home. Here, in that chair." I pointed to it. "You remember all right." A slow flush crept up her throat. That was something. She still could blush. "Who killed him, Carmen?" Her shoulders jerked, but nothing more moved in her face. "Who else knows?" she asked. "About Geiger? I don't know. Not the police, or they'd be camping here. Maybe Joe Brody." It was a stab in the dark, but it got her. "Joe Brody? Him? Did Brody kill him, Carmen?" "Yeah," she said solemnly. "Joe did it." "Why?" "I don't know." She shook her head, persuading herself that she didn't know. "Are you willing to tell the police it was Joe Brody?" I probed. Sudden panic flamed all over her face. "If I can kill the nude photo angle, of course," I added soothingly. "You came back to look for that photo and you couldn't get into the house, didn't you?" Her chin ducked down and up. "The photo's gone," I said. "I looked last night before I took you home. Probably Brody took it with him." "You're not kidding me about Brody." She shook her head earnestly. "It's a pushover," I said. "You don't have to give it another thought. Don't tell a soul you were here, last night or today. Not even Vivian. Just forget you were here. Leave it to Riley." "Your name isn't—" she began and then stopped. She had an idea. "I have to go home now," she said, as if we had been having a cup of tea. She was moving towards the door when we both heard a car coming. The car stopped, right in front of the house. Terror twisted her face. There were steps, and the bell rang. Then a key tickled at the door, and Carmen jumped away from it and stood frozen. The door swung open. A man stepped through it briskly and stopped dead, staring at us quietly with complete composure. He was a gray man, all gray, except for his polished black shoes and 2 scarlet diamonds in his gray satin tie that looked like the diamonds on roulette layouts. It was Eddie Mars. He smiled at Carmen with a nice, easy smile. The fear went out of her face. She smiled back. "Excuse the casual entrance," he said. "Is Mr. Geiger around?" I said, "No, we don't know just where he is. We found the door a little open. We stepped inside." He gave me a long look. "You're friends of his, of course." "Yeah," I said. "We dropped by for a book." "A book, eh?" He said that quickly and brightly, and I thought a little slyly, as if he knew all about Geiger's books. Then he looked at Carmen and shrugged. I moved towards the door. "We'll trot along now," I said. I took hold of her arm. She was staring at Eddie Mars. She liked him. "That's too bad," he said, with too much meaning. "The girl can dust. I'd like to talk to you a little, soldier." I let go of her arm. I gave him a blank stare. "Kidder, eh?" he said nicely. "Don't waste it. I've got 2 boys outside in a car that always do just what I want them to." Carmen made a sound at my side and bolted through the door. Her steps faded rapidly downhill. Eddie Marsh sighed.
There's something wrong around here. I'm going to find out what it is. If you want to pick lead out of your belly, get in my way.
He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was walking around the room, frowning, not paying any attention to me. He stood in front of the camera. He studied it, dropped his glance to the floor in front of it. He moved the small rug with his foot, then bent swiftly, his body tense. There was a sharp exclamation from him. His arm flashed under his coat, and a black Luger appeared in his hand, not pointing at anything.
"Blood," he said, "under the rug."
"Is that so?" I said, looking interested. He picked up the phone from the desk.
"I think we'll have some law,"
he said. "Why not?" I said. His eyes went narrow. He didn't like my agreeing with him.
"Just who the hell are you, soldier?"
"Marlowe is the name. I'm a sleuth."
"Never heard of you. Who's the girl?"
"Client. Geiger was trying to throw a loop on her with some blackmail. We came to talk it over. He wasn't here. The door being open, we walked in to wait. Or did I tell you that?"
"Convenient," he said.
"How come you had a key?" I asked. He smiled tightly and pushed his hat back on his gray hair.
"All right, Bright Eyes. I own this house. Geiger is my tenant."
He tucked the Luger back under his arm.
"Got any good ideas, soldier?"
"Lots of them. Somebody gunned Geiger. Somebody got gunned by Geiger who ran away. Or it was two other fellas." The gray man scowled at me. "I give up," I said. "Better call your friends downtown."
"I don't get it," he said. "I don't get your game here."
"I get you, Mr. Mars. Flash gambling for flash people. The local law in your pocket and a well-greased line into L.A. In other words, protection. Geiger was in a racket that needed that, too. Perhaps you spared him a little now and then, seeing he's your tenant." His mouth became a hard, white grimace.
"What racket would that be?"
he asked. "The smut book racket." He stared at me for a long, level minute.
"Somebody got to him,"
he said softly.
"You know something about it. He didn't show at the store today. They don't know where he is. He didn't answer the phone here. I came up to see about it. I find blood on the floor under a rug, and you and a girl here."
"A little weak," I said, "but maybe you can sell the story to a willing buyer. You missed a little something, though. Somebody moved his books out of the store today, the nice books he rented out." He snapped his fingers sharply and said,
"I should have thought of that, soldier. You seem to get around. How do you figure it?"
I paused for effect and then said, "I think Geiger was rubbed. I think that is his blood. And the books being moved out gives a motive for hiding the body for a while. Somebody is taking over the racket and wants a little time to organize." He flicked the Luger out again and pointed it at my chest. He frisked me but didn't find a gun. "I don't carry one if I can help it."
"All right. Talk,"
Eddie Mars said. "I'm not ready to give out, Mr. Mars. Killing Geiger to grab his racket would be a dumb trick, and I'm not sure it happened that way, assuming he has been killed. But I am sure that whoever got the books knows what's what. I have a guess who got the books, but that's the part I'm not ready to give out. I've got a client, you know."
"I might make it worth your while,"
he said. I grinned at him. "I can always hear the sound of money. How much are you clinking at me?"
"For doing what?"
he asked. "Well, what did you want done?" He slammed his gun down hard on the desk.
"Listen, soldier. I ask you a question and you ask me another. I want to know where Geiger is for my own personal reasons. I didn't like his racket and I didn't protect him. I happen to own this house. I can believe that whatever you know about all this is under glass, or there would be a flock of Johns squeaking sole leather around this dump. You haven't got anything to sell. My guess is you need a little protection yourself, so cough up."
It was a good guess, but I wasn't going to let him know it. I asked casually, "By the way, how is Mrs. Mars these days?" I thought for a moment I had kidded him a little too far. His hand jerked at the gun, shaking. His face was stretched out by hard muscles.
"Beat it,"
he said quite softly.
"I don't give a damn where you go or what you do when you get there. Only take a word of advice, soldier. Leave me out of your plans or you'll wish your name was Murphy and you lived in Limerick."
"Well, that's not so far from Clonmel," I said. "I hear you had a pal came from there." He leaned down on the desk, frozen-eyed, unmoving. I went over to the door and opened it and looked back at him. There was hate in his eyes. I went out, got into my car, and drove up over the crest. Nobody shot at me. Nobody followed me either. I drove back into Hollywood. It was early evening when I parked near the lobby entrance of the apartment house on Randall Place. I rode the elevator up to the 4th floor. I found apartment 405 and pushed the bell. I waited what seemed a long time. Then the door opened noiselessly about a foot. There was a steady, furtive air in the way it opened. The man was long-legged, long-waisted, high-shouldered, and he had dark brown eyes and a brown, expressionless face that had learned to control its expression long ago. I smiled. He didn't like the smile. His eyes got nasty. I said, "You're Joe Brody." His face hardened. "So what?" I leaned against the door and gave him a dreamy smile. "You got the books, Joe. I got the sucker list. We ought to talk things over." He didn't shift his eye from my face. "Why not?" he said coolly. He stood aside from the door. I went past him into the room. Brody shut the door and pointed a gun at my nose. I said, not moving at all. "Such a lot of guns around town and so few brains. You're the second guy I've met within hours who seems to think that a gat in the hand means the world by the tail. Put it down and don't be silly, Joe." His eyebrows came together and he pushed his chin at me. His eyes were mean. "The other guy's name is Eddie Mars," I said. "Ever hear of him?" "No." Brody kept the gun pointed at me. "If he ever gets wise to where you were last night in the rain, he'll wipe you off." "What would I be to Eddie Mars?" Brody asked coldly, but he lowered the gun. "Not even a memory," I said. We stared at each other. I didn't look at the pointed black slipper that showed under the plush curtain on the doorway to my left. Brody said quietly, "Don't get me wrong. I'm not a tough guy, just careful. I don't know hell's first whisper about you. What's your story?" "Have your friend with the pointed slippers come on in, and I'll tell you," I said. Brody called out without moving his eyes off my stomach. "Come on in, Agnes." The curtain swung aside, and the ash blonde from Geiger's store joined us in the room. She looked at me with a kind of mangled hatred. Her nostrils were pinched, and her eyes had darkened a couple of shades. "I knew damn well you were trouble," she snapped at me and sank down into a chair. I said, "The sucker list I spoke of is in code. I haven't cracked it yet, but there are about 500 names. You got 12 boxes of books that I know of. You should have at least 500 books. That's a lot of rentals, Joe. Your girlfriend knows all about that. At $1 a rental, that's nice money, Joe, enough to spot a guy for." Brody's dark brown stare moved up and down my face. His colt went on hungering for my vital organs. "You're a funny guy," he said tonelessly. "Who has this lovely racket?" "You have," I said. "Almost." The blonde choked and clawed her ear. Brody looked at me and said cunningly, "How have I got that lovely racket?" "You shot Geiger to get it. Last night in the rain. The trouble is he wasn't alone when you whiffed him. Either you didn't notice that, which seems unlikely, or you got the wind up and lammed. But you had nerve enough to take the plate out of his camera, and you had nerve enough to come back later on and hide his corpse, so you could tidy up on the books before the law knew it had a murder to investigate." "Yeah?" Brody said contemptuously. "You take chances, mister. It's kind of goddamn lucky for you I didn't bop Geiger." "You can step off for it just the same," I told him cheerfully. "You're made to order for the rap." Brody's voice went rough. "How come?" he asked. "There's somebody who will tell it that way. I told you there was a witness. Don't go simple on me, Joe." He exploded then. "That goddamn little hot pants!" he shouted. "She would, goddamn her!" I leaned back and grinned at him. "Swell. I thought you had those nude photos of her." He didn't say anything. The blonde didn't say anything. I let them chew on it. Brody's face cleared slowly with a sort of grayish relief. He put his coat down on the table, but kept his hand close to it. "I guess you think I'm dumb," Brody said. "Just average for a grifter. Get the pictures." "What pictures?" I shook my head. "Wrong play, Joe. You know she was there because you had your girlfriend threaten Mrs. Regan with a police rap. Cough up and be sensible." He scowled bitterly. "How did you get to me?" I flicked my wallet out and let him look at my buzzer. "I was working on Geiger for a client. I was outside last night in the rain. I heard the shots. I crashed in. I didn't see the killer. I saw everything else." "And kept your lip buttoned?" Brody sneered. I put my wallet away. Yes, I admitted, up till now. Do I get the photos or not? About these books, Brody said. I don't get that. I tailed them here from Geiger's store. I have a witness. That punk kid, said Brody with a scowl. What punk kid? He scowled again. The kid that works at the store. He skipped out after the truck left. Agnes don't even know where he flops. That helps, I said, grinning at him. That angle worried me a little. Either of you ever been in Geiger's house before last night? Not even last night, Brody said sharply. So she says I gunned him, eh? With the photos in hand, I might be able to convince her she was wrong. Brody sighed. Oh, hell, he said. You win. He slipped the Colt into his side pocket. His left hand went up inside his coat. He was holding it there, his face twisted with disgust, when the door buzzer rang and kept on ringing. Brody didn't like that. His whole face became sharp and foxy and mean. Watching me, Brody took a small bone-handled automatic out of a desk drawer and threw it at the blonde. She caught it, shaking. Brody said, Hold it on low down. If he gets funny, use your own judgment. We ain't licked yet, baby. Oh, Joe, the blonde wailed. She came over and sat next to me on the davenport and pointed the gun at my leg artery. I didn't like the jerky look in her eyes. Brody put his hand in his pocket, on his gun, and walked over to the door and opened it with his left hand. Carmen Sternwood pushed him back into the room by putting a little revolver against his lips. Brody backed away from her with panic on his face. Carmen shut the door behind her and stalked Brody carefully. Agnes turned the gun away from me and swung it at Carmen. I shot my hand out and closed my fingers down hard over the blonde's hand and got the gun off her. Carmen's voice said, without tone, I want my pictures, Joe. Brody swallowed and tried to grin. Sure, kid, sure. Carmen said, You shot Arthur Geiger. I saw you. I want my pictures. Brody turned green. Hey, wait a minute, Carmen, I called. Brody grabbed for the little revolver that was so close to his face. He missed. The gun made a sharp rapping noise, and a bullet broke glass in the window. Brody fell down and jerked Carmen's feet from under her. She landed in a heap, and the little revolver went skidding off into a corner. Brody jumped up on his knees and reached for his pocket. Agnes tried to fight me for the gun. I pushed her to one side and stood up. Brody flicked his eyes at me. I showed him the automatic. He stopped trying to get his hand into his pocket. Christ, he whined, don't let her kill me. I began to laugh. Blonde Agnes was sitting up on the floor. Carmen was crawling on her hands and knees towards her little revolver over in the corner. I stepped past the crawling girl and picked the gun up. I went over to Brody and put the automatic against his midriff and reached his coat out of his side pocket. Give, I said. Brody nodded and took a fat envelope out of his breast pocket and gave it to me. There was the developed plate in the envelope and 5 glossy prints. Sure these are all? He nodded again. Agnes was straightening her hair. Her eyes ate Carmen with a green distillation of hate. Carmen was up on her feet, coming towards me with her hand out. Can I have them now? She asked me with a coy smile. I'll take care of them for you. Go on home and wait for me, I said soothingly. She nodded and slipped into the hall. A minute passed. The blonde adjusted her face by the aid of a pocket mirror. Brody fumbled around with a cigarette and jerked. Satisfied? So far. Why did you put the bite on Mrs. Regan instead of the old man? I tapped the old man once, about 6-7 months ago. I figure maybe he gets sore enough to call in some law. I figure the older sister has a couple of soft spots she don't want the old man to know about. I figure she can raise $5,000 easy. A little weak, I said, but pass it. What do you do for a living, Joe? Insurance, he said. I got a desk in Puss Walgreen's office in the Fullwider building. Are the books here in your apartment? Brody shook his head. Hell no, in storage. You're smart, I said admiringly. Anything incriminating in the joint right now? He looked worried, then shook his head again. That's fine, I told him. How'd you come by the photo? He scowled. Listen, you got what you came after. Maybe a guy slipped it to me. Uh-huh. A guy you just passed in the street? You wouldn't know him again? You never saw him before? Brody yawned. It dropped out of his pocket, he said. Uh-huh. Got an alibi for last night, Poker Pan? Sure. I was right here. Agnes was with me. Okay, Agnes? The blonde opened her eyes and looked at him with vague but uncomplimentary speculation. A half-smart guy, she said with a tired sniff. That's all I ever draw. Never once a guy that's smart all the way around the course. Never once. We've got to agree on a story, I said. For instance, Carmen wasn't here. If you say so, pal, Brody sneered. I stood up and went over to the tall oak desk and took his 2 guns out of my pockets, laid them on the blotters, and started for the door. Brody called, "Hey!" I turned and waited. "You ain't got anything on me," Brody said. "Just a couple of murders. Small change in your circle." He didn't jump more than an inch, but it looked like a foot. He moistened his lips slowly and said, "Sit down, pal. What's that crack about 2 murders mean?" I leaned against the door. "Where were you last night about 7:30, Joe?" His mouth dropped sulkily, and he stared down at the floor. "I was watching Geiger. He had a nice racket going, and I figured maybe he needs a partner. So I drove out last night to the street below Geiger's house. There's a car in front of Geiger's and another car a little way up the hill. That's why I stay down below. There's a big Buick parked down where I am, and after a while I go over and take a gander into it. It's registered to Vivian Regan. Nothing happens, so I scram. That's all." He waved his cigarette. His eyes crawled up and down my face. "Could be," I said. "Know where that Buick is now?" "In the sheriff's garage. It was lifted out of 12 feet of water off Lido Fish Pier this morning. There was a dead man in it. He had been sapped, and the car pointed out to the pier and the hand throttle pulled down." Brody was breathing hard. "Jesus, guy, you can't pin that one on me," he said thickly. "Why not? This Buick was down back of Geiger's, according to you. Owen Taylor had it out. He went over to Geiger's place because Taylor was sweet on Carmen, and he let himself in the back way with a jimmy and a gun, and he caught Geiger taking a photo of Carmen. So his gun went off, and Geiger fell down dead, and Owen ran away, but not without the photo negative Geiger had just taken. So you ran after him and took the photo from him." Brody licked his lips. "Yeah," he said, "but don't make me knock him off. Sure, I heard the shots and saw this killer come slamming down the back steps into the Buick and off. I took out after him. Beyond Beverly Hills, he skidded off the road, and I came up and played copper. He had a gun, but his nerve was bad, and I sapped him down. So I went through his clothes and found out who he was, and I lifted the plate holder just out of curiosity. Well, that's the last I saw of him." "How did you know it was Geiger he shot?" I asked gruffly. Brody shrugged. "When Geiger didn't come down to the store this morning and didn't answer his phone, I was plenty sure. So I figure it's a good time to move his books out and make a quick touch on the Sternwoods for travel money and blow for a while." I nodded. "That seems reasonable. Maybe you didn't murder anybody at that, but somebody hid the body." The door buzzer started to ring again. Brody stood up sharply, hard-eyed. "So she's back again," he growled, and marched to the desk and took the Colt. He held it down at his side, opened the door a foot, and leaned into the opening. A voice said, "Brody?" Brody said something I didn't hear. The 2 quick reports were muffled. Brody's body tilted forward against the door, and the weight pushed it shut with a bang. He slid down the wood to the floor and didn't move. I jumped across the room and got the door open. I raced down the hall, hearing thumping feet going down the tile steps, and went down after the sound. And when I got to the street, I saw a tall figure in a leather jerkin running diagonally across the street between the parked cars. The figure turned, and flames spurted from it. 2 heavy hammers hit the stucco wall beside me. The figure ran on out of sight down the hill. I walked quickly down the pavement to my car and got in and started it. I pulled out from the curb and drove down the hill, not fast. The sound of a muted whistling came to me faintly along the pavement. Then steps. I double-parked and took Carmen's little revolver out of my pocket. The whistling grew louder. In a moment, the jerkin showed. I stepped out of the car and said, "Got a match, buddy?" The boy spun towards me. It was the boy from Geiger's store. "You must have thought a lot of that, Queen," I said. A siren wailed distantly coming up the long hill. The boy's head jerked towards the sound. I stepped in close and put my gun to his ribs. "Me or the cops?" I asked him. He looked at me stonily. I reached inside the jerkin and plucked out his automatic. "Get into my car, kid. You drive." He slid under the wheel, and I got into the car beside him. I leaned the automatic against his ribs. The whine of the siren was very loud now. We let the cops go by, then pulled out. "Let's go home," I said. "To Laverne Terrace. What's your name, kid?" "Carl Lundgren," he said lifelessly. "You shot the wrong guy, Carol. Joe Brody didn't kill your queen." When we got to Geiger's place, everything looked the same. "All right," I said. "You have a key. Let's go in and take a look at your nice, clean, manly little room in there." I still held his automatic more or less pointed at him, but he swung on me just the same. I backstepped fast and sank a fist in the side of his neck. He toppled over sideways and sprawled at my feet, out cold. I went to the car, left his gun there, got a pair of handcuffs out, and came back. I twisted his wrists behind him and snapped them on. Then I unlocked the house door, dragged him inside, and shut the door again. The kid began to come round. I said, "Keep quiet or you'll get the same and more of it." I switched on the lights and stepped into the hallway at the back of the living room. Geiger's bedroom didn't seem to have been touched. I opened the door, not locked now, with the bedroom across the hall from it. There was a dim, flickering light in the room and a smell of sandalwood. Geiger lay on the bed. His mouth was closed, and his Charlie Chan mustache was as unreal as a toupee. I went back to the living room. The boy hadn't moved. I stood still, listening for sirens. It was all a question of how soon Agnes talked and what she said. If she talked about Geiger, the police would be there any minute. But she might not talk for hours. She might even have gotten away. I went over to the phone and dialed Bernie Olds. "This is Marlowe," I said. "Did your boys find a revolver on Owen Taylor this morning?" I could hear him clearing his throat, and then I could hear him trying to keep the surprise out of his voice. "That would come under the heading of police business," he said. "If they did, it had 3 empty shells in it." "How the hell did you know that?" Olds asked quietly. "Come over to 7244 Laverne Terrace off Laurel Canyon Boulevard. I'll show you where the slugs went." Olds arrived in less than 20 minutes. He asked the boy, "Do you admit shooting Brody?" I said he doesn't have to admit that. I have his gun. Olds said, "I've called Wild. We'll go over and see him and take this punk. He can ride with me and you can follow on behind." "How do you like what's in the bedroom?" I asked. "I like it fine," Olds said. "I'm kind of glad that Taylor kid went off the pier. I'd hate to have to help send him to the death house for robbing that skunk." When we got to the DA's house, there were 2 cars in the driveway already. A big private sedan and a police car with a uniformed chauffeur. Olds went over and spoke to him, and the chauffeur looked in at the boy in Olds's car. Inside, Taggart Wild sat behind a desk, a middle-aged, plump man with clear blue eyes that managed to have a friendly expression without really having any expression at all. Another man sat at the corner of the desk, a cold-eyed, hatchet-faced man. Olds pulled a chair up and sat down and said, "Evening, Captain Kronjager. Meet Phil Marlowe, a private eye who's in a jam." Kronjager scowled, and Olds grinned. Wild said, "Sit down, Marlowe." I looked from Wild to the police captain, then sat down and lit a cigarette. Olds looked at Kronjager and asked, "Why did you get on the Randall Place killing?" The hatchet-faced man spoke without looking up. A stiff, 2 slugs in him, 2 guns that hadn't been fired. Down on the street we got a blonde trying to start a car that didn't belong to her. She acted rattled, so the boys brought her in and she spilled. She was in there when this guy Brody got it. Claims she didn't see the killer. "Got a description of the killer?" Olds asked. "A tall guy in a leather jerkin," Kronjager replied. "He's outside in my heap," Olds said. "Handcuffed. Marlowe put the arm on him for you. Here's his gun." Olds took the boy's automatic out of his pocket and laid it on a corner of Wild's desk. Wild chuckled. "There's a couple more deaths involved," Olds said. Kronjager stiffened. Olds went on, visibly pleased. "You heard about a car being lifted out of the Pacific Ocean off Lido Pier this morning with a dead guy in it?" Kronjager said no, and kept on looking nasty. "The dead guy in the car was chauffeur to a rich family," Olds said. The family was being blackmailed on account of one of the daughters. Mr. Wilde recommended Marlowe to the family through me. This chauffeur I spoke of that's drowned off Lido shot a guy last night in your territory. A guy named Geiger, who ran a dirty book racket in a store on Hollywood Boulevard. Geiger was living with the punk I got outside of my car. I mean, living with him, if you get the idea. Marlowe can tell you the rest. I left out two things, not knowing just why at the moment I left out one of them. I left out Carmen's visit to Brody's apartment and Eddie Maws's visit to Geiger's in the afternoon. I told the rest of it just as it happened. When I'd finished, Kronjager said with deadly politeness, "So all you did was not report a murder that happened last night and then spend the day foxing around so that this kid of Geiger's could commit a second murder this evening." "That's all," I said. "I wanted to protect my client, and I hadn't any reason to think the boy would go gunning for Brody." Wilde asked, "What makes you so sure, Marlowe, that this Taylor boy shot Geiger? Even if the gun that killed Geiger was found on Taylor's body or in the car, it doesn't follow. The gun might have been planted, say by Brody, the actual killer." "It's physically possible," I said, "but I talked to Brody for a long time. He was a crook, but not a killer type. He was trying to find a way to cut in on Geiger's racket, which naturally he knew all about from the girl. Taylor had the motive, jealous rage, and the opportunity. He was out in one of the family cars without permission. He killed Geiger right in front of the girl. The nude photo business was just what made him do it finally." Wilde chuckled and looked along his eyes at Kronjager, then asked, "What's this business about hiding the body?" I said, "The kid hasn't told us, but he must have done it when I was away taking Carmen to her house. He was afraid of the police, of course, being what he is, and he probably thought it a good idea to have the body hidden until he had removed his effects from the house. He stashed the body in the garage, then went back later and laid him out on the bed. That's all guessing, of course." Wilde nodded. "Then, this morning, he goes down to the store as if nothing had happened and keeps his eyes open. And when Brody moved the books, the kid assumed Brody killed Geiger just for that purpose. What do you think, Oles?" Oles said, "We'll find out. But that doesn't help Kronjager's troubles. What's eating him is all this happened last night, and he's only just been rung in on it." Kronjager looked at me sharply and immediately looked away again. Wilde waved his cigar at me and said, "Let's see the exhibits, Marlowe." I emptied my pockets onto his desk. The 3 notes and Geiger's card to General Sternwood, Carmen's photos, and the blue notebook with the code list of names and addresses. I had already given Geiger's keys to Oles. Wilde tapped the 3 notes signed by Carmen and said, "If General Sternwood paid these, it would be through fear or something worse. Do you know what he was afraid of?" I shook my head. Kronjager took over from Wilde. "Have you told the whole story, Marlowe?" "I left out a couple of personal matters. My client is entitled to that protection short of anything but a grand jury. You've got 2 murders on your hands, both solved. You have both killers with the motive and instrument in each case. The blackmail angle has got to be suppressed as far as the names of the parties are concerned." Wilde stared at me with his clear blue eyes. "You'll have to make statements of all of it, at least for the files. I think it may be possible to keep the 2 killings separate and to keep General Sternwood's name out of both of them." "Thanks," I said. "I'm not through, though. I'm still on the case. I'd do the same thing again if I had to." Wilde smiled at me. "Let me tell you something. My father was a close friend of old Sternwood. I've done all my office permits to save the old man from grief. But those girls of his are bound certain to hook up with something that can't be hushed, especially that little blonde brat. I'll bet $1 to a Canadian dime that the General's afraid his son-in-law, the ex-bootlegger, is mixed up in this somewhere, and what he really hoped you would find out is that he isn't. Did the General tell you he was looking for Regan?" "He told me he wished he knew where he was and if he was all right. He liked Regan and was hurt the way he bounced off without telling the old man goodbye." Wilde leaned back and frowned. "I see." His hand moved Geiger's blue notebook to one side and pushed the other exhibits towards me. "You may as well take these," he said. "I've no further use for them." It was close to 11 when I put my car away and went into the lobby of my apartment building. There was someone waiting for me. I stood still and looked at his flattened nose and club-stake ear.
"The boss wants to talk to you, pal,"
he said. His hands hovered near the upper buttonhole of his open coat. "Give me a break," I said. "If you think I'm going to take orders from Eddie Mars, try getting your gat before I shoot your good ear off." "Nuts! You ain't got no gun." He stared at me levelly. "Like to make a book on it?" I said. He waved his left hand. "Okay, you win. I wasn't told to blast anybody. You'll hear from him." "Too late will be too soon," I said. He went out without looking back. I grinned at my own foolishness and went up to the apartment. I took Carmen's little gun out of my pocket, cleaned it thoroughly, oiled it, wrapped it in a piece of flannel, and locked it up. I made myself a drink and was drinking it when the phone rang.
"My boy Lanny tells me you're tough tonight,"
Eddie Mars's voice said. "Yeah, what can I do for you?"
"Cops over there. You know where. You keep me out of it?"
"I did. I'm damned if I know why. I guess it was just complicated enough without you."
"If that's on the level, I may be able to do you a favor. You're looking for Rusty Regan, aren't you?"
"A lot of people seem to think I am, but I'm not."
"If you were, I could give you an idea. Drop in and see me down at the beach."
"Maybe," I said, and rang off. And then I dialed the Sternwood's number and heard the butler's suave voice saying, "General Sternwood's residence." "This is Marlowe. Is Mrs. Regan home?"
"Yes, I believe so, sir."
"Okay. You give her the message that I have the pictures and that everything is all right."
Yes, sir. I may say thank you very much, sir."
I read the morning papers over my eggs and bacon the next morning. It was as close to the truth as newspaper stories usually come, as close as Mars is to Saturn. No one connected Owen Taylor, driver of the Lido Pierce suicide car, with the Laurel Canyon exotic bungalow slaying. No one mentioned the Sternwoods, Berniols, or me. Owen Taylor was chauffeur to a wealthy family. Brody had shot Geiger, and Carl Lundgren had shot Brody in revenge. Police were holding Carl Lundgren in custody. He had confessed. Police were also holding one Agnes Lozelle, Geiger's secretary, as a material witness. It gave the impression that Geiger had been killed the night before, that Brody had been killed about an hour later, and that Captain Kronjäger had solved both murders while lighting a cigarette. After breakfast, I paid a visit to Captain Gregory of the Missing Persons Bureau. "Private Dick, eh?" he said, not looking at me at all, but looking out of his window. "What can I do for you?" "I'm working for General Guy Sternwood, Alta Brea Crescent, West Hollywood." "On what?" I said, "Not exactly on what you're working on, but I'm interested. I thought you could help me." He thought that over. "Regan?" he asked finally. "Sure." "Know him?" I shook my head. "Nope. But I hear he's a good-looking Irishman in his late 30s, that he was once in the liquor racket, that he married General Sternwood's older daughter, and that they didn't click. I'm told he disappeared about a month back. The General took a big fancy to him, so when some trouble with a blackmail angle crops up, he wants to make sure Regan isn't involved." "He blew the 16th of September, he said. "The only thing important about that is that it was the chauffeur's day off and nobody saw Regan take his car out. We found the car 4 days later in a garage in a ritzy bungalow court place near the Sunset Towers, a place called the Casa de Oro. The car in the garage don't jibe with foul play." I said, "That jibes with Eddie Mars's wife being on the missing list." Gregory looked annoyed. "Yeah. We investigate the tenants and find she's living there. Left about the time Regan did, within 2 days, anyway. A guy who sounds a bit like Regan had been seen with her, but we don't get a positive identification. Here's some of the possibilities. First off, Regan carried 15 grand, packed it in his clothes all the time. Real money, they tell me. So the first thought is somebody rolls him for it and rolls him too hard, so they have to take him out in the desert and plant him among the cactuses. But I don't like that too well. Regan carried a gat and had plenty of experience using it." "Well, you got a photo?" I asked. Gregory pushed a shiny print across the desk, and I looked at an Irish face that was more sad than merry and more reserved than brash. Gregory went on with the possibilities. "Well, there could be people who would know he was sweet on Eddie Mars's Frau, besides Eddie himself. For a wonder, he knew it. But he don't seem to give a damn. We check him pretty thoroughly around that time. Of course, Eddie wouldn't have knocked him off out of jealousy. The setup would point to him too obvious. He'd have us in his hair so much it would interfere with his business. I'm ruling that out. Well, what are you leaving in? I asked. The Mars dame and Regan himself. We don't find her car, so they probably left in it. They had a long start on us, 14 days. Except for that car of Regan's, I don't figure we'd have got the case at all. I don't see nothing to do but wait. They'll run out of dough someday, he said. We'll find him. It may take time. It could take a year or two. Well, General Sternwood may not live that long, I said. We've done all we could, brother. If he wants to put out a reward and spend some money, we might get results. I nodded and thanked him for his time and information and left. A gray Plymouth sedan tailed me away from the city hall. I gave it a chance to catch up with me on a quiet street. It refused the offer, so I shook it off and went about my business. I didn't go near the Sternwood family. I went back to the office and sat in my swivel chair and tried to catch up on my foot dangling. I was doing just that when Norris, the butler, called up. In his carefully polite manner, he said that General Sternwood was not feeling very well and that certain items in the newspaper had been read to him, and he assumed that my investigation was now completed. Yes, as regards Geiger, I said. I didn't shoot him, you know. The General didn't suppose you did, Mr. Marlowe. Does the General know anything about those photographs Mrs. Regan was worrying about? No, sir, decidedly not. Did you know what the General gave me? Yes, sir, 3 notes and a card, I believe. Right. I'll return them. As to the photos, I think I better just destroy them. Very good, sir. The General has instructed me to send you a check for $500. Will that be satisfactory? More than generous, I said. Thank you, sir. I'm sure we all appreciate it. When the General is feeling a little better, possibly tomorrow, he would like to thank you in person. Fine, I said. That was that. We said goodbye and hung up. I counted it up on my fingers. Rusty Regan had run away from a lot of money and a handsome wife to go wandering with a vague blonde who was more or less married to a racketeer named Eddie Mars. He had gone suddenly, without goodbyes, and there might be any number of reasons for that. The General had been too proud or too careful to tell me the Missing Persons Bureau had the matter in hand. The missing persons people evidently didn't think it worth bothering over. Geiger was dead, and Carmen would have to find some other shady character to drink exotic blends of hooch with. I didn't suppose she would have any trouble. Mrs. Regan knew Eddie Mars well enough to borrow money from him. Apart from this, they had an added bond of interest in Regan. He was her husband, and he had gone off with Eddie Mars's wife. Carl Lundgren, the boy killer, was out of circulation for a long, long time, even if they didn't strap him in a chair over a bucket of acid. Agnes Lassalle was in custody as a material witness. They wouldn't need her for that if Carroll took a plea. Well, that left me. I had concealed a murder and suppressed evidence for 24 hours, but I was still at large and had a $500 check coming. The smart thing for me to do was to take a drink and forget the whole mess. That being the obviously smart thing to do, I called Eddie Mars and told him I was coming down to Las Olindas that evening to talk to him. That was how smart I was. Eddie Mars grinned at me sociably and shook hands. You hinted you had something for me, I said. What is it? What's your hurry? Have a drink and sit down. No hurry at all. You and I haven't anything to talk about but business. You'll have the drink and like it, he said. He mixed a couple of drinks and handed one to me. We drank and nodded at each other. One of your friends is outside bending the wheels, he said. One Mrs. Vivian Regan. I sipped my drink and took one of his monogrammed cigarettes. Did you bump her husband off, Eddie? No. Did you think I did? I wouldn't put it past you. He laughed. You're kidding. I laughed. Sure I'm kidding. He looked through his glass at the fire, then asked, You're not really interested in Regan, are you? No, not professionally, I said. Geiger was trying to blackmail the General. The General wouldn't say so, but I figure he was at least half scared Regan might be behind it. Eddie Mars laughed. Geiger worked that one on everybody. It was strictly his own idea. I said, How come you know all this? He shrugged impatiently. I wish to Christ I didn't know half the stuff that's brought to me. Knowing other people's business is the worst investment a man can make in my circle. Then if it was just Geiger you were after, you washed up on that angle. Washed up and paid off.
I'm sorry about that. I wish old Sternwood would hire himself a soldier like you on a straight salary, to keep those girls of his home at least a few nights a week.
Why? His mouth looked sulky.
They're plain trouble. Take the dark one. She's a pain in the neck around here.
If she wins, you get it back the next night, I said.
I get some of it back, but over a period of time I'm a loser.
I yawned and finished my drink. I'm going out and look the joint over, I said.
Yes, do. Maybe I can do you a real favor someday. You got it all from Gregory this time.
So you own a piece of him, too, I said, and moved to the door. You don't have anybody tailing me around in a gray Plymouth sedan, do you? His eyes widened sharply. He looked jarred.
Hell no. Why should I?
I couldn't imagine, I said, and went on out. I thought his surprise looked genuine enough to be believed. I thought he even looked a little worried. I couldn't think of any reason for that. I was leaning against the bar, turning a small glass of Bacardi around on the mahogany and watching Vivian Regan's black hair through the cluster of well-dressed people at the middle table. She's picking 'em tonight right on the nose, the bartender told me. The crowd parted briefly, and I saw the back of her neck and her bare shoulders in the opening. She wore a low-cut dress of dull green velvet. The noise swelled at the table, and a chiseled foreign voice rose above it, saying, "If you will just be patient a moment, madame, Mr. Mars will be here in a moment." I left my Bacardi and padded across the carpet to the end table at the left. Vivian Regan's long lashes twitched, and her face looked unnaturally white. There was a disordered pile of money and chips in front of her. It looked like a lot of money. She spoke to the croupier with a cool, insolent, ill-tempered drawl. "What kind of a cheap outfit is this, I'd like to know? I want one more play." The croupier smiled, a cold, polite smile. "The table cannot cover your bet, madame. You have over $16,000 there." "It's your money," the girl jeered. "Don't you want it back?" A door opened in the paneling at the far end of the room, and Eddie Mars appeared with a set, indifferent smile on his face. He spoke with lazy calm, less politely than the croupier.
"Something the matter, Mrs. Regan?"
I saw the curve of her cheek stiffen. She said bitterly, "One more play, Eddie. Everything I have on the red. I like red. It's the color of blood." Eddie Mars smiled faintly, then nodded and drew out a large pin-seal wallet with gold corners and tossed it carelessly along the table to the croupier.
"Cover the bet in even thousands," he said. "If no one objects to this turn of the wheel being just for the lady."
No one objected. Vivian Regan leaned down and pushed all her winnings savagely with both hands onto the large red diamond on the layout. The croupier silently counted out 16 $1,000 bills from the wallet and then laid it aside as carelessly as if it was a book of matches. Nobody moved. The croupier spun the wheel, left-handed, and sent the ball skittering along the upper edge with a casual flick of his wrist. Then he drew back his hands and folded his arms. Vivian's lips parted slowly until her teeth caught the light and glittered like knives. The croupier didn't unfold his arms until the wheel had entirely ceased to revolve. "The red wins," he said formally, without interest. Vivian Regan put her head back and laughed triumphantly. Eddie Mars smiled, put his wallet back in his pocket, turned on his heel, and left the room through the door in the paneling. I got to the far end of the room before Vivian had gathered up her winnings and turned away from the table. I got my hat and coat and went out on the porch. I went down the porch steps and drifted off through the trees towards where they parked the cars. I stopped. A little in front of me, I had heard a man cough. My steps hadn't made any sound on the soft, moist turf. But while he was still coughing, I moved forward closer to him. Something made me step behind a tree and crouch down. The man turned his head. There was a mask over his face. I waited behind the tree. Light steps, the steps of a woman, came along the invisible pathway, and the man in front of me moved forward. I could see the woman indistinctly. The arrogant carriage of her head was familiar. The man stepped out very quickly. There was dead silence for a moment. Then the man said,
"This is a gun, lady. Just hand me the bag."
The girl stood motionless. There was a movement from him.
"It better be in here,"
he said. A catch clicked, and a fumbling sound came to me. There was something in that voice that reminded me of a flattened nose and a club-stake ear. I reached a pipe out of my pocket and held it like a gun. I called out softly, "Hi, Lanny." The man stopped dead and started to bring his hand up. I said, "You're covered." Nothing moved. The girl back on the path didn't move. I didn't move. Lanny didn't move. "Put the bag down between your feet, kid," I told him, slow and easy. He bent down. I jumped out and reached him, still bent over. I leaned against him and took the gun out of his overcoat pocket. "Somebody's always giving me guns," I told him. "On your way, Lanny. No hard feelings. You keep it quiet and I keep it quiet, okay?"
"Okay,"
he said thickly. The fog swallowed him. The faint sound of his steps, and then nothing. I picked the bag up and felt in it and went towards Vivian Regan. She still stood there, motionless, a gray fur coat held tight around her throat with an ungloved hand. "Nice work, Marlowe. Are you my bodyguard now?" Her voice had a harsh note. She took her bag from me and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Eddie Marsh thought I was looking for somebody he thought had run away with his wife." "Oh, were you?" "No." "Then what did you come for?" "To find out why he thought I was looking for somebody he thought had run away with his wife." "Did you find out?" "No." "I thought you weren't interested in that," she said. "Well, people keep throwing it at me." She clicked her teeth in annoyance. The incident of the masked man with a gun seemed to have made no impression on her at all. She took hold of my arm. "Let's ride in your car, Marlowe." I drove down the curving line of trees, and she sat silently in the corner of the seat. We drove away from Las Olindas through a series of little dank beach towns with shack-like houses built down on the sand close to the rumble of the surf, and larger houses built back on the slopes behind. "What's Eddie Marsh got on you?" I said. She looked at me. "I took plenty away from him tonight at roulette, starting with $5,000 I borrowed from him yesterday and didn't have to use. Drive down by the beach. I want to look at the sea." I took a turning that led to the water. I braked against the curb and switched the headlights off and sat with my hands on the wheel. "Move closer," she said almost thickly. I moved out from under the wheel into the middle of the seat. She fell without a sound into my arms. I tightened my arms and lifted her up. I brought her face slowly up to my face. I kissed her tightly and quickly. Then a long, slow kiss. Her lips opened under mine. Her body began to shake in my arms. I kept on kissing her. After a long time, she pulled her head away enough to say, "Where do you live?" "Hobart Arms," I said. "I've never seen it." "You want to?" "Yes." "What has Eddie Marsh got on you?" Her body stiffened in my arms. "So that's the way it is," she said in a soft, dull voice. "That's the way it is. Kissing is nice, but your father didn't hire me to sleep with you." "You son of a bitch," she said calmly, without moving. I laughed in her face. "I don't think I'm an icicle," I said. "I have warm blood like the next guy. You're easy to take. Too damned easy. What has Eddie Marsh got on you?" "If you say that again, I'll scream." "Go ahead and scream." She jerked away and pulled herself upright, far back in the corner of the seat. "What makes you think he has anything on me?" she whispered. "He lets you win a lot of money and sends a gun poke around to take it back for him. You're not more than mildly surprised. You didn't even thank me for saving it for you. I think the whole thing was just some kind of an act, at least partly for my benefit." Her voice became an icy drawl. "Take me away from here, if you will be so kind. I'm quite sure I'd like to go home." I started the car and turned it and drove back across the interurban tracks to the highway and up to West Hollywood. She didn't speak to me and hardly moved all the way back. I drove through the gates of the big house. She jerked the car door open and was out of it before it had quite stopped. She didn't speak even then. I turned back, down the driveway, and home. Back at my apartment, I needed a drink and was in a hurry to get one. I didn't switch the light on inside the door. I made straight for the kitchenette and brought up short in 3 or 4 feet. Something was wrong. Something on the air. A scent. I stood still and listened. There was no sound at all. I reached the wall switch and flicked the light on. Carmen Sternwood lay on her back in my bed, giggling at me. "Cute, aren't I?" she said. I dug a cigarette out and looked at her with bleak eyes. "I'm all undressed," she said, after I'd smoked and stared at her for a minute. "By God," I said, It was right at the back of my mind. In another minute, I'd have said, I bet you're all undressed. You're cute. She rolled her head a little, then took hold of the covers, paused dramatically, and swept them aside. She was undressed, all right. The Sternwood girls were giving me both barrels that night. That's nice, I said, but I've already seen it all, remember? I'm the guy that keeps finding you without any clothes on. Now get dressed like a good little girl. Go ahead. I won't watch you. I looked away. Then I was aware of a hissing noise, very sudden and sharp. It startled me into looking at her again. She sat there naked, propped on her hands, her mouth open a little, her face like scraped bone. She called me a filthy name. I said carefully, I'll give you 3 minutes to get dressed and out of here. If you're not out by then, I'll throw you out. Just the way you are, and I'll throw your clothes after you. Now, get started. She dressed. I watched her. Then she walked quickly to the door and opened it and went out, without speaking, without looking back. I heard the elevator lurch into motion and move in the shaft. I walked to the windows and pulled the shades up and opened the windows wide. I went back to the bed and looked down at it. The imprint of her head was still in the pillow, of her small, corrupt body still on the sheets. I stubbed my cigarette out and tore the bed to pieces savagely. It was raining again the next morning, a slanting gray rain like swung curtains of crystal beads. Across the street, the same gray Plymouth sedan was parked, with the same little man behind the wheel. I went out and got some breakfast, then went up to my office. I opened my mail and found the General's check for $500. That made it a nice morning. I was making out a bank slip when the buzzer told me somebody had entered my 2x4 reception room. It was the little man from the Plymouth. I told him to come in. He slid past me carefully as I held the door, as carefully as though he feared I might plant a kick in his minute buttocks. We sat down and faced each other across the desk. He was a very small man, not more than 5'3", and would hardly weigh as much as a butcher's thumb. "I'm Harry Jones," he said. "You've been following me around for a couple of days," I told him. "Maybe you're selling insurance. Maybe you knew a fellow called Joe Brody." His eyes bulged and his lower lip almost fell in his lap. "Christ, how did you know that?" he said. "I'm psychic. Shake your business up and pour it. I haven't got all day." He said, "I've got something to sell. Cheap. For a couple of C notes." "Hey, how'd you tie me to Joe?" "Don't mind me. I was just guessing. I suppose Agnes is loose." The little man straightened in his chair. "Yeah, she sent me. Hey, you made a crack when you were up there the night Joe got squibbed off. Something about Brody must have known something good about the Sternwoods, or he wouldn't have taken the chance on that picture he sent them." "Uh-huh. So, what was it?" "Well, that's what the $200 pays for." I lit myself a cigarette while the little man watched me. "We gotta get out of town," he said. "Agnes is a nice girl. You can't hold that stuff on her." "She's too big for you," I said. "She'll roll on you and smother you." "That's kind of a dirty crack, brother," he said with something that was near enough to dignity to make me stare at him. I said, "You're right. I've been meeting the wrong kind of people lately." "Well, what have you got for the money?" "Something that might help you find Rusty Regan." "I'm not looking for Rusty Regan," I sighed. "Says you. You want to hear it or not?" I nodded. "Eddie Mars had Regan bumped off," he said calmly, and leaned back as if he had just been made a vice president. I waved a hand in the direction of the door. "On your way, small size." He leaned across the desk, white lines at the corners of his mouth. "I came to speak my piece, and I'm speaking it. Rusty was sweet on a singer named Mona Grant. Then she changed her name to Mars. Rusty got sore and married a rich dame that hung around the joints like she couldn't sleep well at home. I said that one day Rusty ran away. He started to run away, maybe, with this girl Mona. She wasn't living with Eddie Mars, didn't like his rackets." "Most of this is on the record, Harry," I said. "You can't expect money for that." The little man got impatient. "I'm coming to what isn't. So Regan blew. I used to see him every afternoon in Vardy's drinking Irish whiskey and staring at the wall. He don't talk much anymore. He'd give me a bet now and then, which was what I was there for, to pick up bets for Puss Walgreen. I thought he was in the insurance business.
Well, that's what it says on the door. I guess he'd sell you insurance at that if you trampled on him. Well, about the middle of September, I don't see Regan anymore. I don't notice it right away. You know how it is. A guy's there and you see him, and then he ain't there and you don't see him until something makes you think of it. But what makes me think about it is I hear a guy say, laughing, that Eddie Mars's woman lammed out with Rusty Regan, and Mars is acting like he was best man instead of being sore. So I tell Joe Brody, and he gets to figuring if he get a line somehow on the two lovebirds, he could maybe collect twice. Once from Eddie Mars and once from Regan's wife.
$5,000's worth, I said. He nicked them for that a while back.
Yeah?
Harry Jones looked mildly surprised.
Agnes ought to have told me that. Well, Joe and me watch the papers and we don't see anything, so we know old Sternwood has a blanket on it. Then one day, I see Lash Canino in town. You know him?
I shook my head.
Well, there's a boy that is tough like some guys think they are tough. He does a job for Eddie Mars when Mars needs him. He bump a guy off between drinks. When Mars don't need him, he don't stay in L.A. Well, it might be something and it might not. Anyway, I tell Joe when Joe gets on Canino's tail. Joe tails Canino out to the Sternwood place, and Canino parks outside the estate, and a car comes up beside him with a girl in it. They talk for a while, and Joe thinks the girl passes something over, like maybe dough. It's Regan's wife. Okay, she knows Canino, and Canino knows Mars. So Joe figures Canino knows something about Regan and is trying to squeeze a little on the side for himself. Canino blows, and Joe loses him. End of Act 1.
Well, what does this Canino look like, I asked.
Short, heavy-set, brown hair, brown eyes, and always wears brown. Drives a brown coupe. Everything brown for Mr. Canino.
I said, that's very interesting, Harry, but it's still not worth $200.
Would you give the $200 to know where Eddie's wife is?
The little man asked calmly. He had all my attention now. I almost cracked the arms of my chair leaning on them.
Even if she was alone?
Harry Jones added in a soft, rather sinister tone.
Even if she never runs away with Regan at all, and was being kept now about 40 miles from L.A. in a hideout? So the law would keep on thinking she had dusted with him? Would you pay $200 for that, Seamus?
I licked my lips. They tasted dry and salty. I think I would, I said. Where?
Agnes will tell you where that is when she's holding the money in her hand.
I made a hard face at him. He stared at me level-eyed, a funny little hard guy I could have thrown from home plate to second base. A small man in a big man's world. There was something I liked about him. I said, you'll get the $200 for that information. I have to get the money myself first. He stood up and nodded.
That's okay. After dark is better anyway. Suppose you come over to the office, the full wide-up building, Western and Santa Monica, 428 at the back. You bring the money, I'll take you to Agnes.
With that, he went out. I went down to the bank and deposited my $500 check and drew out $200 in currency. I went upstairs again and sat in my chair thinking about Harry Jones and his story. It seemed a little too pat. It had the austere simplicity of fiction rather than the tangled woof of fact. Captain Gregory ought to have been able to find Mona Mars if she was that close to his beat, supposing, that is, he had tried. At 7, the rain had stopped for a breathing spell, but the gutters were still flooded. On Santa Monica, the water was level with the pavement, and a thin film of it washed over the top of the curbing. My rubber heels slithered on the pavement as I turned into the narrow lobby of the full wide-up building. I shook the rain off my hat and looked at the building directory. Numbers with names and numbers without names. Painless dentists, shyster detective agencies, small sick businesses that had crawled there to die. A nasty building. A building in which the smell of stale cigar butts would be the cleanest odor. An old man dozed in the elevator, on a ramshackle stool with a burst-out cushion under him. I went past him softly. The clandestine air of the building prompting me, found the fire door and pulled it open. The fire stairs hadn't been swept in a month. Bums had slept on them, eaten on them, left crusts and fragments of greasy newspaper and matches. In a shadowy angle against the scribbled wall, a pouched ring of pale rubber had fallen and had not been disturbed. A very nice building. I came out of the 4th floor sniffing for air.
I went down the line and turned a corner. The name L.D. Walgreen Insurance showed on a dark pebbled glass door, on a second dark door, and on a third, behind which there was a light. A glass transom was open above the lighted door. Through it, the sharp, bird-like voice of Harry Jones spoke, saying, "Canino? Yeah, I've seen you around somewhere. Sure." I froze. The other voice spoke. It had a heavy purr like a small dynamo behind a brick wall. It said, "I thought you would." There was a vaguely sinister note in that voice. A chair scraped on linoleum. Steps sounded. The transom above me squeaked shut. A shadow melted from behind the pebbled glass. I went back to the first of the 3 doors marked with the name Walgreen. I tried it cautiously. It was locked. I reached my wallet out and slipped a thick, hard window of celluloid from over my driver's license. I put my gloves on, leaned softly and lovingly against the door, and pushed the knob hard away from the frame. I pushed the celluloid plate into the wide crack and felt for the slope of the spring lock. There was a dry click, like a small icicle breaking. I hung there motionless. Nothing happened inside. I turned the knob and pushed the door back into darkness. I shut it behind me as carefully as I had opened it. There was a connecting door to the next office. This was unlocked. I passed into the second of the 3 offices. I crossed the room. A tight fan of light spread from an inch opening of the door into the lighted office. Everything very convenient. I walked like a cat on a mantle and reached the hinged side of the door, put an eye to the crack, and saw nothing but light against the angle of the wood. The purring voice was now saying quite pleasantly, "So you go to see this peeper? Well, that was your mistake. Eddie don't like it. The peeper told Eddie some guy in a gray Plymouth was tailing him. Eddie naturally wants to know who and why, see?" Harry Jones laughed lightly. "Well, you know why I went to the peeper? I already told you. Account of Joe Brody's girl. She has to blow and figures the peeper can get her some dough." The purring voice said gently, "Dough for what? Peepers don't give that stuff out to punks." Harry Jones put on a brave voice. Brody was trying to peddle a nudist photo of the young Sternwood girl. Marlowe got wise to him. And while they were arguing about it, the young Sternwood girl dropped around herself with a gad. She took a shot at Brody. She lets one fly and breaks a window. Only the peeper didn't tell the coppers about that, and Agnes didn't neither. She figures it's railway fare for her not to. The purring voice said, still gentle, "Well, from what I hear, this Agnes was just a shill for Geiger. I'll talk it over with Eddie. Where's Agnes now?" Harry Jones laughed again, but didn't answer. The purring voice said, "Look at it, little man." I didn't move. I wasn't wearing a gun. I didn't have to see through the crack of the door to know that a gun was what the purring voice was inviting Harry Jones to look at. I waited. Harry Jones sighed. "Okay," he said wearily. "She's in an apartment house at 28 Court Street, up on Bunker Hill, apartment 301. I guess I'm yellow, all right. Why should I front for her?" "You got good sense. No hard feelings?" No hard feelings, Canino." "Fine. Let's tip the bill. You got a glass?" The purring voice was now as false as an usherette's eyelashes and as slippery as a watermelon seed. A drawer was pulled open. A chair squeaked. "This is Bond stuff," the purring voice said. "Drink up." I heard a short, sharp cough, then a violent retching. There was a small thud on the floor as if a thick glass had fallen. There was labored breathing for a short moment, then thick silence. "So long, little man," said Mr. Canino. Steps, a click, a wedge of light died at my feet. A door opened and closed quietly. The steps faded, leisurely and assured. I stood around the edge of the door and pulled it wide. In the close air there was a heavy clogged smell, almost a perfume. I heard the distant clang of the elevator. I found the light switch. Harry Jones looked at me across the desk, his eyes wide open, his face frozen in a tight spasm, the skin bluish. Harry Jones, dying, had vomited on his coat. That made it cyanide. I walked around him carefully and lifted the phone. I dialed information. "Can you give me the phone number of apartment 301, 28 Court Street?" "One moment, please." A silence. The number is Wentworth 2528. It is listed under Glendower Apartments.
I thanked the voice and dialed the number. The bell rang 3 times, then the line opened. The radio blared along the wire and was muted. A burly male voice said, "Hello. Is Agnes there?" "No Agnes here, buddy. What number you want?" "Wentworth 2528. "Right number? Wrong gal. Ain't that a shame?" The voice cackled and hung up. I wiped sweat off my face and looked across at little Harry Jones grimacing in his chair. "Well, you fooled him, Harry," I said out loud. I had to search him. It was a nasty job. His pockets yielded nothing about Agnes, nothing that I wanted at all. I put the light out and started to open the door. The phone bell rang jarringly. I listened to it, my jaw muscles drawn into a knot, aching. Then I shut the door and put the light on again and went across to it. "Yeah?" A woman's voice. "Is Harry around?" "Not for a minute, Agnes." She waited a while on that. Then she said slowly, "Who's talking?" "Marlowe, the guy that's trouble for you. I came over to give him $200 in return for certain information. The offer holds. I have the money if you want it." I want it pretty bad, mister." "All right, then. Tell me where to bring it." Her voice trailed off and came back with a panic rush. "Where's Harry?" "Got scared and blew. Meet me somewhere, anywhere at all. I have the money." She paused, then said, "I'll meet you in half an hour. Beside Bullock's Wilshire, the east entrance to the parking lot?" "Right," I said. I left the office, went down the fire stairs, and left the building. Half an hour later, I had met up with Agnes. "Oh, give me the money," she said. The motor of the gray Plymouth throbbed under her voice, and the rain pounded above it. Her black-gloved hand reached out, and I put the bills in it. "I want my information," I said. "You'll get it." Joe and I were riding Sunday before last. We passed a brown coupe, and I saw the girl who was driving it. There was a man beside her, a dark, short man. The girl was Eddie Mars's wife. The guy was Canino. We trailed the coupe. Canino, the watchdog, was taking her out for air. A mile or so east of Rayolito, a road turns towards the foothills. Just off the highway, there's a small garage and paint shop run by a guy named Art Huck. Hot car drop, likely. There's a frame house beyond this. That's the place where she's holed up. Goodbye, copper, and wish me luck. I got a raw deal. "Like hell you did," I said, and walked across the street to my own car. I drove north across the river and followed the blonde's instructions to Rayolito. Then fate stage-managed the whole thing. Beyond Rayolito, my right front tire let go with an angry hiss. The right rear went with it. I jammed the car to a stop, got out, and flashed a spotlight around. I had 2 flats and 1 spare. The flat butt of a heavy galvanized tack stared at me from the front tire. The edge of the pavement was littered with them. I unstrapped the license holder from the steering post and put it in my pocket. I leaned lower under the wheel. Behind a weighted flap, directly under my right leg as I sat in the car, there was a hidden compartment. There were 2 guns in it. One belonged to Eddie Mars's boy, Lanny, and one belonged to me. I took Lanny's and started up the side road. The garage was 100 yards from the highway. I played the flash on it quickly. Art Huck, motor repairs and painting. The garage doors were shut. The frame house was there, light in 2 front windows, shades down. A car stood on the gravel drive in front. It was dark, indistinct, but it would be a brown coupe, and it would belong to Mr. Canino. I banged on the garage door with the butt of my flash. There was a hung instant of silence, as heavy as thunder. A voice spoke through the door, a surly voice. "What do you want?" "Open up. I've got 2 flats back on the highway and only 1 spare. I need help." "Sorry, mister, we're closed up." I didn't like that. I kicked the door hard. Another voice made itself heard, a purring voice, like a small dynamo behind a wall. It said, "A wise guy, huh? Open up, Art." A bolt squealed, and half of the door opened. My flash burned briefly on a gaunt face and the barrel of a gun. I snapped the flash off, and the man backed away from the open door and kept the gun leveled at me. "Okay, stranger, We'll see what we can do." I stepped inside and shut the door behind my back. I looked at the gaunt man, but not at the other man who was shadowy over by a workbench, silent. "Ain't you got no sense?" the gaunt man chided me. "A bank job was pulled at Rayolito this noon." "Pardon?" I said. "I didn't pull it. I'm a stranger here." "Well, there was," he said morosely. The purring voice from over in the shadows said, "Cut out the heavy menace, Art. You run a garage, don't you?" "Thanks," I said. Okay, the man in the overalls grumbled. He grabbed a coat and went out. I looked at the man by the workbench now. He was short and thick-bodied with strong shoulders. He had a cool face and cool dark eyes. He wore a belted brown suede raincoat. His brown hat was tilted rakishly. We were alone. He didn't know who I was. "I bet you could use a drink," he said. "Wet the inside and even up." He reached a bottle from the workbench behind him and got 2 glasses. He poured a stiff jolt into each and held one out. Walking like a dummy, I went over and took it. I sniffed my drink delicately. It had the right smell. I watched him drink some of his before I swallowed mine. There was no cyanide in it. I lit a cigarette. I wanted my tires fixed. The minutes passed on tiptoe. Art returned, trundling 2 muddy flats. "You sure pick spots for a jack to stand on," he snarled. The brown man laughed and took a rolled cylinder of nickels out of his pocket and tossed it up and down on the palm of his hand. Art heaved one tire up on a spreader and tore the rim loose viciously. He had the tube out in a second. I stood watching the roll of wrapped coins dance in Canino's hand. The teamwork must have been very nice. I saw no signal. The gaunt man suddenly slammed the tube down over my head and shoulders, a perfect ringer. The brown man closed his fist over the roll of nickels. He came up to me without sound. He hit me. There was no sensation in my head. There was nothing but hard, aching white light. Then there was darkness. It seemed there was a woman, and she was sitting near a lamp. She was so platinumed that her hair shone like a silver fruit bowl. I moved my head a little. Carefully. It hurt. Handcuffs held my wrists behind me, and a rope went from them to my ankles and then over the end of the brown davenport on which I was sprawled. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Great," I said. "Somebody built a filling station on my jaw." "Is this the house next to Art Huck's garage?" She nodded. "What are the boys doing? Digging a grave for me?" "They had to go somewhere." "You mean they left you here alone? I thought they were keeping you a prisoner." It seemed to startle her. It even slightly amused her. "What made you think that?" "You're Mona Mars, aren't you?" Her very blue eyes flashed sharply. Her mouth tightened, but her voice didn't change. "Why did you come here and stick your neck out?" she asked quietly. "Eddie wasn't doing you any harm. You know perfectly well that if I hadn't hidden out, the police would have been certain Eddie murdered Rusty Regan." "He did," I said. Her breath made a harsh, quick sound. She said softly, "Eddie didn't do anything to him. Eddie's not that sort of man." "That's what you think," I said. "You think he's just a gambler. I think he's a pornographer, a blackmailer, a hot car broker, a killer by remote control." "He's not a killer," she said quickly. "Not personally. He has Canino. If Eddie is such a nice guy, I'd like to get to talk to him without Canino around. You know what Canino will do. Beat my teeth out and then kick me in the stomach for mumbling." She put her head back and stood there thoughtful and withdrawn, thinking something out. Then, abruptly, she walked out of the room. She came back with a kitchen knife and sawed at my rope. "Canino has the key to the handcuffs," she said. "I can't do anything about those." I swung my feet to the floor and stood up. I tottered around, stiff-legged. I could still walk. I could run, if I had to. "I guess you mean me to go," I said. She nodded without lifting her head. "You'd better go with me if you want to keep on living." She shook her head violently. I stepped up close to her, almost pressing against her. "You're going to stay here after turning me loose? Wait for that killer to come back so you can say sorry?" "Just get out!" She almost spat at me. "Okay." I turned away from her and moved towards the front door. "Goodbye," she said under her breath. "Good luck in everything but one thing. Eddie didn't kill Rusty Regan. You'll find him alive and well somewhere when he wants to be found." I went out through the door and closed it behind me, without sound. The garage next door was dark. I crossed the gravel drive and a patch of sodden lawn. I came to the highway. I found my convertible where I'd left it, both tires fixed and mounted. I reached into it and got the other gun and started back. Halfway there, the headlights nearly caught me. I slid down the bank into the wet ditch, and the car hummed by without slowing. I lifted my head, heard the rasp of its tires as it left the road and took the gravel of the driveway. The motor died. The lights died. A door slammed. I came back to the soggy grass plot and sloshed across it. Canino's car was between me and the house. The gun was down at my side, pulled as far around as I could get it, without pulling my left arm out by the roots. The keys hung on the dash. Canino was very sure of himself. He wouldn't be in there long. He would be on his way and take her with him. I couldn't wait. I leaned into his car and started the engine. The warm motor caught at once. It purred softly, contentedly. I got out of the car again and crouched down by the rear wheels, watching the house. A darkened window slid down inch by inch. Flames spouted from it abruptly, the blended roar of 3 swift shots. Glass starred in the coupe. I yelled with agony. The yell went off into a wailing groan choked with blood. It was nice work. Canino liked it very much. I heard him laugh. Then silence for a little while. Then the house door crawled open and Mona Mars came out on the porch. Canino came, crouched methodically behind her. He grunted something, and the girl's body jerked hard, as though he had jammed a gun into her back. She stopped rigid. "I can see him!" she screamed. "Through the window, behind the wheel, Lash!" He fell for it like a bucket of lead. He knocked her roughly to one side and jumped forward. 3 more spurts of flame cut the darkness. If it was a revolver he had, it might be empty, it might not. I said, "Finished?" He whirled at me. I shot him 4 times, the Colt straining against my ribs. The gun jumped out of his hand as if it had been kicked. He reached both hands for his stomach. He fell, face down, in the wet gravel. Mona stood rigid, with the rain swirling at her. Then she was bending down over him. After a little while she stood up, with a small key on a thin chain. Without saying a word, she went behind me and unlocked the handcuffs. This was another day, and the sun was shining again. Captain Gregory of the Missing Persons Bureau looked at me. "So you got yourself in another jam, Marlowe. Shooting this Canino was all right, I guess, but I don't figure the homicide boys pinned any medals on you. Who told you this girl out there was Eddie Mars's wife?" I told him. He listened carefully and yawned. "Oh, maybe I knew," he said. "Maybe I thought if Eddie and his woman wanted to play a little game like that, it would be smart to let them think they were getting away with it. That's mainly why I asked you to come in this morning. I'd like to see the flashy, well-dressed mugs like Eddie Mars spoiling their manicures in the rock quarry at Folsom." I didn't say anything. "But that don't mean I think Eddie Mars bumped off Regan. I just figured maybe he knows something about it, and maybe sooner or later something will sneak out into the open." I stood up and grinned at him and started for the door. When I'd almost reached it, he cleared his throat suddenly and said in a harsh voice, "I'm wasting my breath, huh? You still think you can find Regan?" I turned round and looked him straight in the eyes. "No, I don't think I can find Regan. I'm not even going to try. Does that shoot you?" He nodded slowly, and I left. I got my car from the parking lot and drove home to the Hobart Arms. I lay down on the bed. I tried to go to sleep, but sleep didn't come. My mind drifted through waves of memory. I was driving hard along the highway through the rain with Mona in the corner of the car. I was getting out at an all-night drugstore and phoning Bernie Olds that I had killed a man at Rialito and was on my way over to Wilde's house with Eddie Mars's wife, who had seen me do it. I was telling the story, and they were listening quietly. There was a lot of telephoning. I was driving again, with one of them beside me, to the Fullwider building where Harry Jones was still in the chair behind the desk. I was back again at Wilde's house, signing a typewritten statement his secretary had run off in another room. It was like that, over and over again, lying on the bed and watching the patch of sunlight slide down the corner of the wall. Then the phone rang, and it was Norris, the Sternwood butler, with his usual untouchable voice. "The General would like to see you this morning, Mr. Marlowe, if it's convenient." I shaved, changed clothes, and got Common's little pearl-handled revolver and dropped it into my pocket. When I got to the Sternwood place, it was 11:15. I rang the bell. It was 5 days since I had rung it for the first time. It felt like a year. In a few moments, Norris appeared and showed me to the General's room. General Sternwood was propped up on pillows.
"Sit down, Mr. Marlowe."
His voice sounded weary and a little stiff. I pulled a chair close to him and sat down. He said lifelessly,
"I didn't ask you to look for my son-in-law, Mr. Marlowe."
"You wanted me to, though."
"Well, why did you go to see Captain Gregory?"
I leaned back and hung an arm over the back of the chair. "Well, the morning I was here, after I left you in the orchid house, Mrs. Regan sent out for me. She seemed to assume I was hired to look for her husband, and she didn't seem to like it. She let drop, however, that they had found his car in a certain garage. The they could only be the police. In that case, the Missing Persons Bureau would be the department that would have the case."
"And you allowed Captain Gregory to think I had employed you to find Rusty?"
"Yeah, I guess I did, when I was sure he had the case. You don't know what I have to go through or over or under to do your job for you. I do it in my way. I do my best to protect you, and I may break a few rules, but I break them in your favor. After all, you didn't tell me not to go to Captain Gregory."
"That would have been rather difficult,"
he said with a faint smile. "Well, what have I done wrong? Your man Norris seemed to think when Geiger was eliminated, the case was over. I don't see it that way. Geiger wanted to find out if there was anything putting pressure on you. If there was, you would pay him. If not, you would ignore him and wait for his next move. But there was something putting a pressure on you. Regan. You were afraid he was not what he had appeared to be. You're still too proud to be played for a sucker, and you really liked Regan." There was a silence. Then the General said quietly,
"I'll pay you another $1,000 to find Rusty. I want to know that he is all right wherever he is. I want to know it from him directly. If he should happen to need money, I should want him to have that also. Am I clear?"
I said, "Yes, General." He was pretty nearly licked.
"I guess I'm a sentimental old goat. Find him for me, Marlowe. Just find him."
"I'll try," I said. "You'd better rest now. I've talked your arm off." I got up quickly, shut the door quietly, and went back down the stairs. I stood outside on the step and looked down the vistas of grass terraces and trimmed trees and flower beds to the tall metal railing at the bottom of the gardens. I saw Carmen about halfway down, sitting on a stone bench, with her head between her hands, looking forlorn and alone. I went over to her and was quite close before she heard me. She jumped up and whirled like a cat. A target hung on a tree about 30 feet away with some darts sticking to it. There were 3 or 4 more on the stone bench where she had been sitting. "For people with money, you and your sister don't seem to have much fun," I said. She looked at me under her long lashes. This was the look that was supposed to make me roll over on my back. I took a little pearl-handled gun out of my pocket. "I brought you back your artillery. I cleaned it and loaded it up. Take my tip. Don't shoot it at people unless you get to be a better shot. Remember?" Her face went pale. She looked at me and then at the gun I was holding. There was fascination in her eyes. "Yes," she said and nodded. Then suddenly, "Teach me to shoot." "Huh?" "Teach me how to shoot. I'd like that." "Here? It's against the law." She came close to me and took the gun out of my hand, cuddled her hand around the butt. Then she tucked it quickly inside her slacks, almost with a furtive movement, and looked around. "I know where. she said in a secret voice.
"Down by some of the old wells."
She pointed off down the hill.
"Teach me?"
I looked into her slaty blue eyes. I might as well have looked at a couple of bottle tops. We got into the car, and I drove down the sunken driveway and out through the gates. "Where's Vivian?" I asked.
"Not up yet,"
she giggled. I drove on down the hill, then south. We reached the place she meant in about 10 minutes.
"In there."
She leaned out of the window and pointed. It was a narrow dirt road, not much more than a track. Then a squat wooden derrick stuck up over a branch. The wells were no longer pumping. There was the stagnant, oil-scummed water of an old sump, iridescent in the sunlight. "This the place you had in mind?" I asked.
"Uh-huh. Like it?"
"It's beautiful." I pulled up beside the loading platform, and we got out. The place was as lonely as a churchyard. I bent down and picked up a rusty can. Carmen held her little pistol in her hand. "Take it easy now," I said. "It's loaded in all 5. I'll go over and set this can up. Now don't start shooting until I get back beside you, okay?"
"Okay."
I went around the sump and set the can up, then I went back towards her. When I was about 10 feet from her, at the edge of the sump, she showed me all her sharp little teeth and brought the gun up and started to hiss. I stopped dead, the sump water stagnant and stinking at my back.
"Stand there, you son of a bitch," she said.
The gun was pointed at my chest. I laughed at her. I started to walk towards her. I was about 6 feet away from her when she started to shoot. The sound of the gun made a sharp slap, without body, a brittle crack in the sunlight. I stopped again and grinned at her, then went on walking. She fired more, very quickly and quite carefully, not worried at all. I think I felt the hot breath of the powder blast a little. "My, but you're cute," I said. Her hand, holding the empty gun, began to shake violently. Her whole face went to pieces. Then her head screwed up towards her left ear, and froth showed on her lips. I caught her as she fell. She was already unconscious. I pried her teeth open with both hands and stuffed a wadded handkerchief in between them. I got her into the car, then drove back the way we had come, and so home. At the Sternwood place, the maid directed me to Mrs. Regan's sitting room and then went back to see about Carmen. I sat down and waited for Vivian to come in. After what seemed a long time, she appeared in oyster-white lounging pajamas trimmed with white fur, cut as flowingly as a summer sea frothing on the beach of some small exclusive island. She sat down on the edge of the chaise longue. I didn't say a word. She began to fidget.
"What did you do to her?"
she asked. "Not a thing. I had something that belonged to her. A little revolver Owen Taylor gave her once. She took it over to Brody's place the other evening, the evening he was killed. I had to take it away from her there." Vivian's black Sternwood eyes got large and empty. It was her turn not to say anything. "She wanted me to teach her how to shoot, and she wanted to show me the old oil wells. So we went down there, and I stuck a can up for her to pop at. She threw a wingding. Looked like a mild epileptic fit to me. I guess you still wouldn't tell me what Eddie Mars has on you."
"Nothing at all, and I'm getting a little tired of that question," she said coldly.
"Do you know a man named Canino?"
"I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Marlowe."
"Suppose you did. It would be something like this. Geiger got his hooks into your sister and tried to blackmail your father. Eddie Mars was behind Geiger, protecting him and using him for a cat's paw. Geiger was killed by Owen Taylor. That didn't mean anything to Eddie. He was playing a deeper game than Geiger knew anything about, or than Brody knew anything about, or anybody except you and Eddie and a tough guy named Canino. Eddie was playing for $1 million or so. He knew where Regan had gone and why, and he didn't want the police to have to find out. He wanted them to have an explanation of the disappearance that would keep them satisfied. Am I boring you?"
"You tire me,"
she said in a dead, exhausted voice. "I'm sorry. I'm not just fooling around trying to be clever. Your father offered me $1,000 this morning to find Regan. That's a lot of money to me, but I can't do it. Her mouth jumped open. Her breath was suddenly strained and harsh. "Why?" she said thickly. I took Carmen's little gun out of my pocket and laid it carefully, with exaggerated care, on her white satin knee. She didn't move. "It's harmless," I said. "All 5 chambers empty. She fired them all. At me." The pulse jumped wildly in her throat. Her voice tried to say something and couldn't. She swallowed. I said, "Cute little thing, isn't she? Too bad I loaded the gun with blanks." I grinned nastily. I had a hunch about what she would do, if she got the chance. She brought her voice back from a long way off. "You're a horrible man," she said. "Horrible. You can't prove that she fired at you." I said I wasn't thinking of trying. I was thinking of another time, when the little gun had real slugs in it. Her eyes were pools of darkness. "I was thinking of the day Regan disappeared," I said. "Late in the afternoon, when he took her down to those old wells to teach her to shoot. She turned the gun and shot him. Just the way she tried to shoot me today, and for the same reason. She moved a little, and the gun slid off her knee and fell to the floor. Her eyes were riveted on my face." I went on. "The night before last, when I got home, she was in my apartment. She'd kidded the manager into letting her in to wait for me. She was in my bed, naked. I threw her out on her ear. I guess maybe Regan did the same thing to her sometime. But you can't do that to Carmen. So Mr. Canino disposed of the body when you went to Eddie Mars for help. And Eddie expects to collect one of these days, doesn't he, when you come into the family fortune?" She was as silent as a stone woman. "All right," I went on heavily. "Will you take her away? Somewhere far off from here where they can handle her type? Where they will keep guns and knives and fancy drinks away from her? Hell, she might even get herself cured, you know. It's been done." She stayed silent for a while, then she caught her breath sharply and spoke. "He's in the sump," she said. "A horrible decayed thing." I did just what she said. I went to Eddie Mars. She came home and told me about it, just like a child. I knew the police would get it all out of her. In a little while she would even brag about it, and if Dad knew, he would call them instantly and tell them the whole story. And probably die telling it. It's not his dying, it's what he would be thinking just before he died. "So you let her run around loose," I said, "getting into other jams." "I was playing for time," she said. "I've heard they do forget what happens in those fits. Maybe she has forgotten." "You'll take her away?" I said. She nodded, then said softly, "What about you?" "Nothing about me. I'm leaving. Get her out of here and see that she's watched every minute. Promise?" "I promise." "Eddie," she began. "Forget Eddie. I'll go see him after I get some rest. I'll handle Eddie." "He'll try to kill you," she said. "Yeah," I said. "His best boy couldn't. I'll take a chance on the others. Does Norris know?" Again she nodded. "I thought so," I said. I went quickly away from her and out of the room. I got into my car and drove off down the hill. What did it matter where you lay once you were dead? In a dirty sump or in a marble tower on top of a high hill? You just slept the big sleep, not caring about the nastiness of how you died or where you fell. Me, I was part of the nastiness now. Far more a part of it than Rusty Regan was. But the old man didn't have to be. He could lie quiet in his canopied bed, with his bloodless hands folded on the sheet, waiting. And in a little while, he too, like Rusty Regan, would be sleeping the big sleep.